My name is Zuri and I am 31. I built a successful luxury skincare line and own the multi-million-dollar estate my husband was currently standing in. I slammed the heavy oak door of my Buckhead mansion and pretended to leave for the office. Instead, I slipped quietly into the garage, stood in the shadows between our cars, and opened the baby monitor app on my phone. I watched the live video feed from the nursery and waited in silence. Seconds later, what my husband said to his mother and sister left me frozen. Before I tell you exactly how I dismantled his entire life and took back my power, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit the like button and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to toxic in-laws who tried to take everything you worked so hard to build. I stood in the dim garage, gripping my phone so tightly my fingers ached. The cold concrete floor seeped a chill through the soles of my heels, but real ice was forming in my veins. On the glowing screen, I watched the live feed from the camera mounted above the crib of my 1-year-old son, Zion. The camera captured the room perfectly. My husband, Deshaun, was leaning over the crib. Deshaun was a wealth management director who prided himself on his public image. He wore a custom suit and had that smooth, charismatic smile that fooled half of Atlanta into believing he was a devoted family man. Standing right beside him were his mother, Gwendolyn, and his younger sister, Dominique. They looked like a picture-perfect family admiring a baby. But the audio feed from the hidden monitor revealed a reality so dark it made my stomach turn. Deshaun let out a low, cruel laugh that echoed softly through the speaker. "The pills are working flawlessly," he said, turning to his mother with a proud smirk. She could not even remember her laptop password this morning. "Dr. Sterling says 2 more weeks of these vitamins, and her brain will be mush. I will have the medical power of attorney and full control of her company before the quarter ends." I stopped breathing. The malicious words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Dominique stepped closer to the crib, adjusting her expensive purse. "Good," she sneered, "because my Mercedes lease is due next week and I am moving into this master suite by Thanksgiving. I am so tired of smelling her cheap Decatur roots in this house. She acts like her self-made money makes her one of us, but she will always be working-class trash." Gwendolyn nodded her head in enthusiastic agreement. Her face twisted in pure contempt. "We have tolerated her lack of proper pedigree long enough," Gwendolyn said, crossing her arms. "Deshaun, you deserve a sophisticated woman from a proper legacy family. Once you control the skincare brand and the real estate, we can finally put her away in a psychiatric facility where she belongs. She is just a cash cow that has served her purpose. It is time to put her out to pasture." I leaned against the sleek hood of my car, trying to process the magnitude of the betrayal I was hearing. Every confusing piece of the puzzle from the last 2 agonizing months suddenly slammed into place. The overwhelming physical exhaustion, the sudden dizziness, the frightening inability to recall simple appointments or focus on daily emails. I had blamed it all on the intense stress of running a massive company while being a new mother. I had actually cried to Deshaun late at night about feeling like I was losing my mind. And every single morning, my supposedly loving husband would bring me fresh orange juice and my daily postpartum vitamins. He would kiss my forehead, tell me I was working too hard, and stand there watching me swallow the pills. Those pills were not vitamins. They were high-dose sedatives. He and his fake doctor friend were intentionally poisoning me. They were slowly destroying my cognitive functions so they could declare me legally incompetent. They wanted to steal my thriving company, my ancestral land, and my hard-earned wealth to fund their ridiculous elite lifestyle. They were willing to leave Zion without his real mother just so they could parade around the country club with my money. A normal person might have screamed out loud. A normal person might have burst back through the front door throwing wild accusations and crying tears of heartbreak. But I did not shed a single tear. The betrayal was far too absolute for crying. A cold, calculating clarity washed over my entire being. I needed to act immediately, but I absolutely could not let them know I had discovered their sinister plot. If Deshaun realized I knew the ugly truth, he might accelerate his timeline to silence me. I needed to disarm his primary weapon right this second. I quietly unlocked the heavy door connecting the garage to the mudroom. I slipped off my heels, holding them tightly in one hand, as I walked silently in my bare feet across the polished hardwood floor. I knew the exact layout of my custom house and exactly where Deshawn kept my daily vitamins on the marble kitchen counter. The kitchen was completely empty. I could hear their voices still drifting down from the nursery on the second floor. I opened my designer tote bag and pulled out a spare bottle of generic prenatal vitamins I kept for travel emergencies. I reached the kitchen counter and found the decorative daily pill organizer Deshawn always used. I opened today's specific compartment and poured the large, unfamiliar white capsules into a soft tissue. I shoved the tissue deep into my coat pocket to save for later chemical analysis. Then I took my safe generic vitamins and placed them carefully into the organizer. I took a deep, stabilizing breath, smoothing the fabric of my dress and intentionally calming my racing heart. I dropped my shoes onto the tile floor, letting them make a loud, clacking sound. I walked back toward the mudroom door, opened it wide, and slammed it shut with massive force. Deshawn! I called out, projecting a tone of mild annoyance into my voice. I am so incredibly stupid. I forgot my office keys on the dining table again. The sound of heavy, hurried footsteps came rushing down the wooden stairs. Within moments, Deshawn appeared in the hallway, his handsome face arranged into a flawless mask of polite, husbandly concern. "Oh, baby," he said, walking toward me with a gentle, comforting smile. "You really are losing your head lately. Do you want me to just drive you to the office today?" It took every single ounce of self-control I possessed not to strike him across his smug, lying face. I forced a sheepish, embarrassed smile and shook my head side to side. "No, I am totally fine," I replied, picking up my keys from the glass table. "I just have a lot of complex things on my mind with the new product launch this week. I am sorry I interrupted your quality time with your mother and sister." Deshawn kissed my cheek. His lips felt like poison. "Drive safe, my beautiful love," he murmured against my ear. "Try to get some real rest today." I nodded obediently and turned away, walking back out to the cold garage. I started my car and backed out of the driveway. I watched my beautiful home shrink in the rearview mirror, knowing it was currently occupied by greedy parasites who desperately wanted to destroy my life. I kept my face entirely blank until I was 3 full blocks away. I was going to let them think their evil plan was working perfectly, while I silently dismantled their entire privileged world piece by piece. They wanted to play a dangerous game of shadows, but they had no idea they were dealing with a woman who actually owned the entire board. I stopped at a red light. My phone chimed loudly from the cup holder. I glanced down at the bright screen. It was an automated high-priority security alert from my private bank. The notification read in stark black letters, "Authorized transfer completed $50,000 from Zion College Trust Fund to Terrence Realty, LLC." Terrence was Dominique's husband, and his commercial real estate business had been failing miserably for the past 3 years. Deshawn had not just planned to steal from me in the near future. The financial theft had already begun right under my nose. They were actively stealing money from my innocent 1-year-old son who could not defend himself. I gripped the leather steering wheel until my hands shook and pressed my foot down hard on the gas pedal as the traffic light turned green. The war had officially started. The heavy custom oak doors of Gwendolyn's Cascade mansion swung open before I could even lift my finger to press the polished brass doorbell. The rich smell of roasted meats, seasoned greens, and aggressively expensive perfumes spilled out into the humid evening air. I plastered on a serene expression, adjusting my grip on the bakery box in my hands. Inside the sprawling foyer, the sounds of clinking crystal and pretentious laughter echoed off the imported marble floors. This was the weekly Sunday dinner, a sacred, unyielding ritual for Deshawn's family to parade their supposed generational wealth and maintain their suffocating social hierarchy. I walked slowly into the formal dining room where Gwendolyn sat perched at the head of the massive custom table, directing the household staff like a military general preparing for battle. She paused mid-sentence when she saw the cardboard box in my hands. Her perfectly arched eyebrows pinched together in a look of absolute disgust. She stood up, smoothing her tailored silk dress, and walked deliberately over to inspect my contribution. She snatched the box from my hands and flipped the lid open, revealing the premium store-bought peach cobbler inside. A heavy, tense silence fell over the room as the staff stopped moving. Gwendolyn let out a sharp, condescending sigh that commanded everyone's immediate attention. "A real woman cooks for her man, Zuri?" She sneered, her voice dripping with calculated venom. "But I guess when you grow up eating out of cans, you do not know how to run a black elite household." The words were meant to strike me down in front of everyone. They were meant to maliciously remind me of my humble working-class roots in Decatur, to remind me that despite my massive bank accounts and self-made success, I would never possess their fabricated royal blood. Deshaun stood near the mahogany bar, swirling an amber liquid in his heavy crystal glass. He gave a weak, apologetic shrug that I now knew was entirely performative. A few hours ago, before I looked at that baby monitor, that comment would have made my chest tighten with deep inadequacy. Now it just fueled the burning fire coursing through my veins. "You are absolutely right, Gwendolyn," I replied, my voice completely smooth and perfectly pleasant. "I spent my entire weekend negotiating a global distribution deal for my skincare line. I suppose I forgot to prioritize making pastry dough from scratch. I will definitely try to do better next time." Her jaw tightened aggressively at the mention of my business, the very business they were actively plotting to steal from me. Before she could launch another verbal assault to put me back in my place, the front door chimed and a loud, joyful shriek echoed through the hallway. Dominique practically floated into the dining room, her husband Terrence trailing behind her with a deeply smug grin. All eyes immediately shifted to Dominique, but more specifically to her chest. Resting against her collarbone was a breathtaking diamond tennis necklace. The stones caught the ambient light from the massive chandelier, throwing brilliant prisms across the dining room walls. It was a flawless, heavy custom piece. It was also undeniably expensive. "Look what my amazing husband just bought me," Dominique squealed, doing a theatrical spin for her mother. "Terrence just closed a massive new real estate commission. We are celebrating tonight." Gwendolyn clapped her hands together, rushing over to admire the glittering diamonds. Deshaun offered Terrence a firm handshake and a congratulatory slap on the back. They were all grinning widely, exchanging looks of supreme arrogance. I stared hard at the necklace, and I knew exactly where that massive commission came from. $50,000 drained directly from my one-year-old son's college trust fund earlier that very afternoon. Terrence had not closed a real estate deal in 6 months. His boutique brokerage was drowning in corporate debt. The necklace was not a trophy of his hard work. It was a glittering trophy of their successful theft. They were literally wearing my child's stolen future around their necks and parading it right in my face. The sheer audacity of the display required an immediate physical response. I walked calmly over to the bar and poured myself a generous glass of a deep, dark vintage Merlot. I needed to move to the next phase of my protocol, but I required a massive distraction. A loud one. I turned around and began walking toward the dining table right as Dominique stepped forward to show off the intricate clasp of her new jewelry. I timed my steps perfectly. I allowed the heel of my shoe to catch the thick edge of the expensive Persian rug. I stumbled forward, throwing my hands up to catch my balance. The entire glass of dark Merlot launched through the air in a perfect crimson arc. It splashed directly onto Dominique's chest, drenching the new diamonds and soaking completely through her pristine white silk designer dress. A blood-curdling scream erupted from Dominique's throat. The red wine bloomed across the expensive fabric like a massive wound, ruining the garment instantly. "My dress!" she shrieked frantically, pulling at the soaked silk. "Are you blind, Zuri? This is a $5,000 dress. You completely ruined it." Total chaos consumed the formal dining room. Gwendolyn started yelling for the house staff to bring club soda and salt immediately. Terrence grabbed a linen napkin and aggressively dabbed at Dominique's chest, causing the red stain to smear even further into the delicate white silk. Deshaun rushed over, attempting to calm his hysterical sister while shooting me a look of extreme disappointment and fake concern. "I am so incredibly sorry," I gasped, pressing my hands to my mouth in a display of exaggerated horror. I just suddenly felt so dizzy and lost my balance. It must be my medication making me clumsy. I dropped my clutch purse intentionally, letting it slide directly beneath Gwendolyn's chair. While the entire family was intensely focused on the ruined dress and screaming at the poor staff, I dropped to my knees, pretending to frantically search for my spilled belongings. I crawled quickly under the massive oak dining table. The thick hanging tablecloth shielded me completely from view. I reached into the hidden lining of my purse and pulled out a voice-activated micro-recorder. It was no larger than a small coin with a strong adhesive backing designed specifically for corporate espionage. I pressed it firmly against the underside of the heavy wood right beneath where Gwendolyn always sat to hold her private family meetings. I secured it, tightly ran my thumb over the edge to ensure it was completely hidden, and grabbed my purse. I stood back up, clutching my head and swaying slightly. "Deshaun," I said, my voice trembling with fake vulnerability. "I am feeling extremely unwell right now. I think I need to go home and lie down." Deshaun immediately switched into his designated role of the burdened but supportive husband. He wrapped an arm tightly around my waist, casting a significant knowing look toward his furious mother. "Of course, baby," he said softly. "Let us get you home to rest. Your mind is just overwhelmed today." I apologized once more to a furious Dominique and let Deshaun guide me out of the house. The drive back to Buckhead was suffocatingly quiet. Deshaun played soft jazz music and held my hand at red lights, playing his part flawlessly. I leaned my head against the cool glass of the passenger window, closing my eyes and counting every single breath to maintain my composure. Sitting next to the man who was actively poisoning me took every ounce of restraint I possessed. I had the bug safely in place. Now I needed to know the full extent of the financial damage. As soon as we walked through our front door, I feigned severe exhaustion and headed straight for the master bedroom. I locked the heavy door behind me and walked directly into my massive walk-in closet. I pushed aside a row of heavy winter coats and accessed a hidden wall panel where I kept my private secure server. Being a successful entrepreneur meant I never left my digital security to chance. I booted up the custom system and bypassed our home network's firewalls. I needed to see exactly what Deshaun was doing on his personal laptop. I ran a powerful decryption software I had purchased from a cybersecurity firm months ago for corporate protection. It took less than 10 minutes to crack his administrative passwords and mirror his email outbox directly to my screen. The first few emails were standard wealth management correspondences, but then my eyes caught a locked PDF file sent to a high-risk commercial lending firm just 2 days prior. The subject line read, "Urgent Collateral Verification." I downloaded the file immediately and forced the encryption open. The document loaded onto my screen, line by line. My blood turned to absolute ice. It was a formal property deed transfer and a commercial loan agreement. Deshaun had forged my signature. He was actively using my grandfather's ancestral land in Savannah as collateral for a massive high-risk loan. That land had been in my family for 4 generations. I had fiercely refused to sell it for years, honoring my grandfather's dying wish to keep the dirt in our name. But Deshaun had discovered what I already knew. The city of Savannah had just approved a massive new commercial zoning boom. That seemingly empty plot of dirt was now prime real estate valued at over $15 million. I scrolled down rapidly to read the precise terms of the loan agreement. Deshaun was not securing funding for our family. He was using my $15 million ancestral inheritance to secure a desperately needed cash injection for his wealth management firm's failing hedge fund. His firm was bleeding money rapidly, and he was using my generational wealth to plug the holes and save his own professional reputation. If the hedge fund collapsed, the commercial lenders would seize my grandfather's land, immediately leaving me with absolutely nothing. I stared hard at the forged signature at the bottom of the digital document. It was a perfect replica of my handwriting. He had planned this operation for months. He intentionally drugged me to ensure I would be too confused and exhausted to notice the legal notices arriving in the mail. He stole from my innocent son to fund his sister's silence and buy a diamond necklace. And now he was handing over my sacred family legacy to save his own fragile ego. They thought I was just a naive girl from the wrong side of the tracks who got lucky in the business world. They truly thought they could break my mind, strip me of my hard-earned assets, and throw me away while parading my wealth as their own. I closed the laptop and pushed the hidden wall panel back into place. A terrifying, overwhelming calm settled over me. I walked over to the full-length mirror and stared at my reflection. The terrified, confused wife they thought they were dealing with was dead. The woman looking back at me was a predator ready to strike. I was not just going to stop the property transfer. I was going to let them walk right into their own elaborate trap. I was going to let them build their entire arrogant future on a foundation of sand, and then I was going to wash it all away. My phone vibrated sharply on the vanity table. It was a secure text message from a private investigator I had retained just an hour ago. The message read, "I have the preliminary information you requested on Terrence Realty LLC. It is much worse than you thought." I locked the screen and smiled. The shadow protocol was fully engaged. The next morning, the heavy oak door to the master suite creaked open. I was already in bed, staring blankly at the ceiling, perfectly playing the role of the heavily medicated, exhausted wife. Deshaun walked in with a look of deep manufactured concern etched across his handsome face. He was not alone. Trailing closely behind him was a tall, broad-shouldered man holding a sleek leather medical briefcase. The man wore a pristine white lab coat over a tailored suit, but I recognized him the very second he stepped into the light. My private investigator had sent me a comprehensive dossier on Deshaun's inner circle months ago. This was Marcus Sterling. Deshaun always referred to him as a top-tier medical specialist, but the dossier told the real story. Marcus was Deshaun's former fraternity brother who had his medical license permanently revoked 3 years ago for running a fraudulent prescription pill mill out of a strip mall clinic. "Zuri, baby," Deshaun murmured, sitting gently on the edge of the mattress and taking my hand. "I know you have been struggling so much lately." The memory lapses, the sudden outbursts, the extreme fatigue. I could not sit by and watch my beautiful wife suffer anymore. So I called in a favor. This is Dr. Sterling. He is the absolute best behavioral specialist in Atlanta. He is here to help us figure out what is going wrong. I forced my eyes to widen in mock terror, pulling the duvet up to my chin. I played the part of a cornered, frightened woman flawlessly. "I do not need a doctor," I whispered, my voice trembling with artificial panic. "I am just tired, Deshaun. The baby has not been sleeping, and the new product launch at the lab is stressing me out. Please just let me rest." Marcus Sterling stepped forward, opening his briefcase with practiced authority. "Now, Zuri, we need to be completely honest with each other," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Deshaun has told me everything. He told me about how you completely forgot your security passwords yesterday. He told me about the violent, unprovoked attack on his sister Dominique at family dinner last night. Throwing a glass of red wine is a massive red flag. These are classic textbook symptoms of severe postpartum psychosis. You are losing your grip on reality, Zuri. You are becoming a serious danger to yourself, and more importantly to baby Zion." The sheer audacity of their performance was almost impressive. They were weaving a terrifying web of lies, using my intentional actions from the night before as fabricated proof of my declining mental state. Deshaun squeezed my hand harder, squeezing until it actually hurt. His eyes filled with fake unshed tears. He was giving an Oscar-worthy performance of a heartbroken husband watching his wife lose her mind. "I am terrified for you, Zuri." Deshaun choked out, his voice cracking perfectly. "You are the love of my life, but I cannot let you destroy the skincare empire you built because your mind is failing. I cannot let you accidentally harm our son because you are hallucinating. Dr. Sterling says if we do not act immediately, the state might step in and force you into a psychiatric facility against your will. We have to protect you from yourself." Sterling pulled a thick stack of stapled legal documents from his briefcase and laid them neatly on my nightstand. Institutionalization is an ugly, traumatic process, Zuri, he warned, shaking his head sadly. But there is a much better way to handle this quietly. Deshaun has had his lawyers draft these emergency protective orders. It is a comprehensive medical proxy and a financial power of attorney. By signing these, you temporarily grant your husband complete legal control over your medical decisions, your bank accounts, your real estate holdings, and your skincare company. It is just a temporary safety measure until we get your brain chemistry properly regulated. I stared at the thick stack of papers. There it was, the ultimate endgame laid bare on my nightstand. With one stroke of a pen, I would legally hand over everything I had bled and sweated to build over the last decade. My multi-million-dollar business. My grandfather's $15 million ancestral land in Savannah. My absolute freedom. They thought I was drugged out of my mind and terrified of being locked in an asylum. They thought I would blindly sign away my entire empire just to stay in my own bed. I let out a loud, dramatic sob, burying my face in my hands. I rocked back and forth on the mattress, letting my shoulders heave, as if I were completely breaking down under the immense psychological weight of their gaslighting. "You are right," I cried, peering through my fingers at their smug, expectant faces. "I feel like I am going crazy. I cannot remember anything. I do not want them to take my baby away. I will sign whatever you want, Deshaun. Just please do not let them lock me up." Deshaun exhaled a massive breath of relief. He quickly grabbed a silver pen from his jacket pocket and thrust it toward me. "Just sign on the dotted lines, baby," he urged eagerly, tapping his finger against the signature blocks. "I will take care of everything." I swatted his hand away, acting erratic and deeply superstitious. "No," I cried, shrinking back against the headboard. "I cannot use that pen. It is bad luck. I can only sign important documents with my lucky pen. My grandfather gave it to me before he died. If I do not use it, the business will fail. I have to use my lucky pen, or I will not sign anything." Deshaun and Sterling exchanged a quick, frustrated glance. Sterling gave a subtle nod, signaling Deshaun to just play along with the crazy woman's demands. Deshaun forced a tight smile. "Okay, baby," he said, keeping his voice low and soothing. "Where is this lucky pen? Let us just get this done so you can finally go to sleep." I threw off the heavy duvet and stumbled out of bed, purposefully making my steps uneven and clumsy. I walked over to my antique mahogany writing desk by the window and opened the top drawer. I pushed aside a stack of elegant stationery and pulled out a sleek, heavy black fountain pen. To the untrained eye, it looked like a standard luxury writing instrument. In reality, it was a highly specialized piece of corporate espionage equipment I had special ordered from a tactical supply company in Germany months ago when I first suspected Deshaun was tampering with my business contracts. The pen was loaded with a proprietary industrial-grade disappearing ink. When applied to paper, the dark blue ink looked bold and permanent. But due to its unique chemical composition, it would react with the oxygen in the air and evaporate completely, leaving absolutely no residue, no indentations, and no trace behind after exactly 24 hours. The paper would be entirely blank. I stumbled back to the bed, clutching the black pen to my chest like a lifeline. I snatched the thick stack of legal documents from the nightstand and spread them out across my lap. Deshaun leaned over me, practically salivating, as he pointed to the bottom of each page. I uncapped the specialized pen and began to sign my name. I used bold, sweeping strokes, pressing the dark blue ink firmly into the crisp white paper. I signed the medical proxy, handing over my physical autonomy. I signed the financial power of attorney, surrendering my massive bank accounts. I signed the corporate addendums, giving him full voting rights over my skincare empire. I signed every single page they put in front of me, crying softly the entire time. When I finished, I let the heavy black pen drop from my trembling fingers onto the floor. I collapsed back against the pillows, pulling the duvet over my head and letting out a long, pathetic whimper. Deshaun eagerly snatched the signed documents off my lap, carefully organizing them before handing the entire stack directly to Sterling. Sterling slid the priceless papers into his leather briefcase and snapped the brass locks shut with a sharp, resounding click. "You did the right thing today, Zuri," he said, his voice returning to a cold, clinical tone. "You are a very sick woman, but you are in good hands now. Just follow Deshawn's instructions and take your medication." Sterling turned and walked out of the master suite, his heavy footsteps echoing down the hallway. Deshawn did not immediately follow him. Instead, he walked slowly back over to my side of the bed. The fake mask of the caring, concerned husband completely melted away, leaving nothing but a ruthless, greedy stranger in its place. He leaned down over me, his face inches from mine. His eyes were dark and utterly devoid of warmth. He reached out and stroked my cheek with his thumb. I held my breath, forcing myself to remain perfectly still under his touch. "Just rest, crazy girl," he whispered, his voice a sinister rasp in the quiet room. "I will handle absolutely everything from here on out." He stood up straight, turned his back on me, and walked confidently out of the room. A second later, I heard the heavy, solid thud of the door closing, followed immediately by the sharp metallic scrape of the exterior deadbolt sliding into place. He had locked me inside my own master bedroom. He truly believed he had won. He believed he was walking downstairs with the keys to my kingdom locked safely in a briefcase. He had absolutely no idea that by this time tomorrow, those legally binding documents would be nothing more than blank, useless pieces of expensive paper. I sat up in bed, throwing the duvet aside. The pathetic crying act vanished from my face, instantly replaced by stone-cold focus. I did not have time to celebrate my flawless performance. If Deshawn was locking me in the bedroom, it meant his family was moving to the next phase of their attack. I slid out of bed and rushed straight into the massive walk-in closet, retrieving my laptop from its hidden compartment in the wall panel. I sat cross-legged on the closet floor and booted up the secure server. I immediately accessed the live audio feed from the micro recorder I had planted under Gwendolyn's massive oak dining table the night before. I slipped my noise-canceling headphones over my ears and maximized the volume. The audio feed was crystal clear. I could hear the distinct clinking of fine china and the sharp, commanding tone of Gwendolyn's voice. She was not talking to her staff. She was speaking loudly into her cell phone, and the words chilled my blood. "Yes, I am calling to report an emergency situation regarding a minor child," Gwendolyn stated, her voice dripping with fabricated terror. "My name is Gwendolyn, and I am calling about my grandson Zion. You need to send a caseworker immediately. My daughter-in-law Zuri is violently insane. She is suffering from severe unmedicated psychosis. She physically attacked my daughter last night in a fit of absolute rage, and she is currently locked in her house, refusing to let anyone see the baby. She is highly unstable and a direct threat to that child's life. You need to come take the baby right now before she does something unthinkable." I ripped the headphones off my ears, my breathing turning shallow and fast. Deshawn taking my company was one thing, but Gwendolyn was calling Child Protective Services to have my son ripped from my arms. They were trying to use the state to steal my baby. The ultimate betrayal had just been initiated. I stared at the locked bedroom door, the sound of the deadbolt echoing in my mind. They thought they had trapped a crazy woman. They were about to find out they had locked themselves in a cage with a monster. I spent the entire night turning my luxurious master bedroom into a digital war room. Deshawn had locked the door from the outside, completely convinced that the heavy sedatives were currently turning my brain into useless mush. He had retreated to the guest suite down the hall, playing the role of the exhausted husband, giving his sick wife some much-needed space. He vastly underestimated my resources. Being a self-made multimillionaire meant I did not rely on standard schedules or normal operating hours. I reached into my hidden wall safe and pulled out my secure encrypted burner phone. I immediately contacted my personal concierge medical team. They were a discreet, highly exclusive service that catered to Atlanta executives who required absolute privacy. I paid them a massive monthly retainer for exactly this kind of emergency. I instructed Dr. Aris, a brilliant board-certified psychiatrist and toxicologist, to enter my property through the heavily wooded back service gate. I remotely unlocked the private balcony door that led directly into my suite. By 2 a.m, Dr. Aris was sitting quietly in my bedroom, drawing 2 vials of my blood for an expedited emergency toxicology screen. Following the blood draw, she conducted a rigorous, comprehensive psychological evaluation. I answered every single question with crystal clear precision, detailing my business operations, my financial portfolios, and my current state of mind. By 4 in the morning, Dr. Aris handed me a stamped certified letter declaring me in perfect psychological health with absolutely zero signs of postpartum psychosis or any other mental instability. 2 hours later, the expedited lab results hit my secure server, confirming my bloodstream was completely free of any narcotics or sedatives. I had the physical proof. Now I just needed to set the stage. At exactly 7 in the morning, I heard the heavy deadbolt on my bedroom door slide open. I quickly threw myself under the thick duvet, closing my eyes and breathing in a slow, rhythmic pattern. Deshaun tiptoed into the room. He stood over my bed for a long moment, watching me. I could feel his eyes on me, calculating and cold. He gently placed a fresh glass of orange juice and a new dose of his poisoned pills on my nightstand. "Just sleep, my sweet crazy girl," he whispered, pressing a fake kiss to my forehead. "I have to go to the firm. I will let the house staff know not to disturb you." I waited until I heard the distinct rumble of his sports car leaving the driveway before I threw off the covers. I had exactly 1 hour before Gwendolyn and her state-sponsored ambush arrived. I did not reach for the comfortable silk pajamas they expected to find me in. Instead, I walked into my closet and pulled out a razor-sharp tailored emerald green CEO power suit. I paired it with my most aggressive black stiletto heels. I applied my makeup with surgical precision, ensuring my face looked flawless, rested, and absolutely powerful. I pulled my hair back into a sleek, tight bun. I printed out the certified toxicology reports and the psychiatric clearance, placing them neatly inside a sleek leather presentation folder alongside my iPad. At exactly 8:15, the doorbell rang. It was not a polite ring. It was a series of aggressive, demanding buzzes designed to intimidate. I walked calmly down the grand sweeping staircase, the sharp click of my stilettos echoing through the massive empty foyer. I took a deep breath, squared my shoulders, and pulled open the heavy front door. Standing on my front porch was a stern-looking woman holding a thick clipboard. She wore a state-issued identification badge that read, "Child Protective Services." Flanking her on either side like heavily armed guards were Gwendolyn and Dominique. They had completely dressed for the occasion, wearing somber, muted colors and matching expressions of fake, tragic concern. Gwendolyn already had a crumpled tissue pressed against her cheek, preparing to play the heartbroken grandmother. Mrs. Zuri Henderson, the state worker, asked, her tone tight and authoritative. "My name is Agent Miller. We received a highly disturbing emergency report regarding your mental stability and the immediate safety of your infant son. We need to come inside and evaluate the child right now." Gwendolyn let out a loud, dramatic gasp, stepping forward to peer past my shoulder. "Oh, Zuri," she cried out, her voice trembling with manufactured grief. "We brought help, baby. We know you are losing your mind. Just let us take baby Zion before you do something you will regret." Dominique nodded vigorously, crossing her arms over her chest. "You are clearly a danger to yourself, Zuri. Just surrender the baby. Do not make this any harder than it has to be." They expected me to look disheveled. They expected me to be slurring my words, crying hysterically, and proving every single lie they had fed the state. Instead, I stood tall in the doorway, radiating pure, undeniable authority. I did not step aside. I looked directly into Agent Miller's eyes, maintaining intense, unblinking eye contact. "Agent Miller," I said, my voice smooth, resonant, and perfectly calm. "I am fully aware of why you are here. Please step inside. But these two women will remain on the porch." Gwendolyn dropped her tissue. Her fake concern instantly replaced by genuine outrage. "Excuse me," she barked, trying to push her way past the threshold. "We are the concerned family members who filed the report. We have every right to be inside that house to protect our grandson." I held up a single manicured finger, stopping her dead in her tracks. "You have no rights here, Gwendolyn," I stated coldly. "This is my property. You will stand exactly where you are, or I will have you arrested for trespassing." Agent Miller looked confused. She glanced at Gwendolyn, then back at my immaculate emerald suit and perfectly composed demeanor. This did not fit the profile of the violently psychotic woman she had been sent to investigate. I stepped back and allowed Agent Miller into the foyer, closing the heavy door halfway, so Gwendolyn and Dominique were forced to stand outside in the humid morning heat. Agent Miller, I understand you have a vital job to do protecting vulnerable children, I said, handing her the sleek leather folder. But I need you to review these documents before we proceed any further. I take accusations regarding my fitness as a mother extremely seriously. The agent opened the folder. Her eyes scanned the top document. What is this? She asked, her brow furrowing in confusion. That is a certified legal psychological clearance, I explained, keeping my tone strictly professional. It was conducted at 2 o'clock this morning by Dr. Aris, a board-certified psychiatric specialist who caters to the executive board members of this city. Behind that document, you will find an emergency toxicology report processed just 4 hours ago. It proves my bloodstream is completely devoid of any narcotic sedatives or mind-altering substances. I am the sole founder and active CEO of a global skincare empire. My mind is my greatest asset, and as you can clearly see, my mind is perfectly intact. Agent Miller flipped through the pristine medical documents. The aggressive stance she had brought to my doorstep began to rapidly deflate. She looked back up at me completely bewildered. But the report we received stated you were heavily medicated, suffering from violent delusions, and unable to even remember your own name. The caller stated you physically attacked a family member last night. I smiled a slow, chilling smile. I reached into the folder and pulled out my iPad. I tapped the screen and opened the audio file I had isolated from the dining room bug. Yes, I said softly. Let us talk about that caller. I pressed play. The high-quality audio recording filled the quiet foyer. Gwendolyn's voice rang out sharp and unmistakable. Yes, I am calling to report an emergency situation regarding a minor child. My name is Gwendolyn, and I am calling about my grandson Zion. You need to send a caseworker immediately. My daughter-in-law Zuri is violently insane. She is highly unstable and a direct threat to that child's life. Agent Miller nodded. Yes, that is the exact recording of the report. Keep listening, I instructed, holding the iPad closer to her. The audio continued. The dispatcher on the phone placed Gwendolyn on a brief hold. During that silence, the hidden microphone picked up Gwendolyn speaking directly to Dominique in the dining room. Make sure you look like you have been crying, Dominique, Gwendolyn's recorded voice commanded. Once they take the baby out of that house, Deshawn will have total leverage. If that caseworker asks too many questions, I will offer her supervisor a $10,000 donation to their personal discretionary fund to expedite the removal. We are getting that Decatur trash out of our lives today. I paused the audio. The silence in my foyer was deafening. Agent Miller's face drained of all color. Her mouth hung open in absolute shock. The realization of what had just happened washed over her features. She realized she had been weaponized. She realized these wealthy elite women were trying to use a vital state agency to execute a malicious illegal kidnapping to secure financial leverage. Agent Miller's shock instantly transformed into blazing professional fury. She snapped the leather folder shut and shoved it back into my hands. She spun around and marched back to the front door, ripping it wide open. Gwendolyn and Dominique were leaning against the porch railing, waiting eagerly for the show to begin. Are you taking the baby? Gwendolyn asked, stepping forward with a triumphant smirk. Do you need us to carry him to your car? Agent Miller stepped directly into Gwendolyn's personal space, her voice vibrating with intense rage. You malicious, arrogant woman, the agent practically growled. You filed a fraudulent emergency report to manipulate Child Protective Services. You attempted to plan the bribery of a state official. You tried to use my department to steal an infant from a perfectly healthy mother. I will be forwarding this entire interaction directly to the district attorney for immediate prosecution. Do not ever contact my agency again. Gwendolyn's jaw dropped. She staggered backward as if she had been physically struck. Dominique let out a high-pitched gasp, clutching her ruined silk dress. Wait, Dominique stammered, her eyes darting frantically between me and the furious state worker. You do not understand. She is crazy. She threw wine on me. I stepped out onto the porch, standing right beside the angry CPS agent. Actually, I said, my voice carrying clearly across the manicured front lawn. The only crazy thing happening here is that you two are currently trespassing on my private property. I pulled my phone from my pocket. I had already pushed the silent panic button connected to my private neighborhood security detail 10 minutes ago. Two black security SUVs came screeching around the corner, their amber lights flashing brightly in the morning sun. They pulled up directly in front of my house, blocking Gwendolyn's car. Four large security officers stepped out, walking quickly up my driveway. "Remove these two women from my property immediately," I ordered, pointing sharply at my in-laws. "If they resist, call the local police precinct and have them formally arrested for trespassing and attempted extortion." Gwendolyn lost whatever remaining dignity she possessed. Her face twisted into a mask of pure, unhinged rage. "You cannot do this to me," she screamed, pointing a shaking finger at my face. "I am Gwendolyn Henderson. You are nothing but cheap Decatur dirt. You will respect your betters." Two security guards grabbed Gwendolyn firmly by the arms. She thrashed and kicked, screaming wildly as they physically dragged her down the front steps. Dominique burst into loud, panicked tears, hiding her face behind her designer purse as she hurried after her mother, terrified that the wealthy neighbors were watching the spectacle. The elite, sophisticated facade they prized above all else was completely shattered right on my front lawn. Agent Miller turned to me, offering a deeply apologetic nod. "I am so sorry for this intrusion, Mrs. Henderson. Your son is clearly in safe, capable hands." She walked down the steps past the screaming Gwendolyn and drove away. I stood on my porch, breathing in the crisp morning air. I watched the security team force my mother-in-law and sister-in-law into their vehicle and ensure they drove out of the gated community. I walked back inside, locking the heavy door behind me. I felt a massive surge of adrenaline. The protective orders were useless. The CPS ambush was destroyed. I had completely neutralized their offensive strategy. My phone buzzed in my hand. I looked down at the screen. It was a text message from Deshawn. He was sitting in his fancy office, completely oblivious to the absolute bloodbath that had just occurred at his house. The text read, "Get dressed up tonight, baby. Wear that red dress I like. My firm is hosting the annual charity gala at the Ritz-Carlton. I'm going to make a very special announcement to the partners about your early retirement and how I will be stepping in to manage your stress. I need you by my side." He still thought he had the signed legal power of attorney. He still thought I was drugged and defeated. He wanted to parade his broken wife in front of his wealthy colleagues and formally claim my empire as his own. He wanted a public spectacle. I was more than happy to give him one. I typed my response quickly, my fingers flying across the screen. I smiled as I hit send. I wouldn't miss it for the world. The rest of the afternoon was a masterclass in calculated preparation. I hired a private tactical security detail to guard my home and my son, ensuring absolutely no one from the Henderson family could get within a mile of Zion. Then I focused entirely on my armor for the evening. If Deshawn wanted to parade me around as his broken, retiring wife, I was going to give him a visual he would never forget. I chose a custom crimson silk gown that hugged every curve and pooled like liquid fire around my stiletto heels. It was not the dress of a defeated woman. It was the dress of an executioner. The grand ballroom of the Ritz-Carlton in downtown Atlanta was a sea of glittering crystal and suffocating wealth. This was the pinnacle of the city's social calendar. The room smelled of expensive imported orchids, roasted filet mignon, and aggressive arrogance. Everyone who was anyone was there. Tech founders, real estate moguls, politicians, and the entirety of Deshawn's pretentious wealth management firm were mingling under the massive chandeliers. I slipped through the heavily guarded service entrance using a VIP catering pass I had secured weeks ago. I remained completely hidden in the velvet-draped wings of the main stage, watching the sickening performance unfolding on the floor below. Deshawn was entirely in his element. He wore a bespoke midnight blue velvet tuxedo, working the room with a crystal flute of champagne in his hand. He was shaking hands, accepting premature congratulations, and flashing his blinding trademark smile. Across the room, Gwendolyn and Dominique were holding court at a premium VIP table. Despite their humiliating eviction from my property that morning, they had seemingly convinced themselves that the forged legal documents Deshawn secured would override any temporary setbacks. Dominique was proudly displaying the massive diamond tennis necklace, making sure she angled her body so the stones caught the light. They were laughing, sipping premium cocktails, and acting like absolute royalty who had just successfully conquered a new kingdom. I watched Deshawn check his heavy gold Rolex. He frowned slightly, clearly wondering where his docile, medicated wife was. He pulled out his phone, probably to text me again, but the gala organizer approached and tapped him on the shoulder, pointing toward the stage. It was time. The lights in the massive ballroom dimmed to a soft glow, and a single bright white spotlight illuminated the center stage microphone. A respectful hush fell over the hundreds of attendees as Deshawn bounded up the stairs, looking every inch the successful supportive partner. "Good evening, everyone." Deshawn began, his voice echoing smoothly through the state-of-the-art sound system. "Thank you all for being here tonight to support such vital charitable causes. We are incredibly blessed to be in a room filled with so much success and vision. But tonight I need to speak to you about something much more personal." He paused, bowing his head and taking a deep theatrical breath. It was a flawless performance of a burdened, desperate man. Many of you know my beautiful, brilliant wife, Zuri. She is a pioneer, a visionary, and the founder of a skincare empire that has fundamentally changed the industry. But what you do not know is the heavy, invisible toll that genius has taken on her. Over the last several months, Zuri has been battling a rapid and severe decline in her mental health. It has been the absolute greatest tragedy of my life to watch the woman I love lose her grip on reality. A collective murmur of deep sympathy rippled through the wealthy crowd. Women pressed manicured hands to their chests in shock. Men nodded with grim understanding. Gwendolyn dabbed at a completely dry eye with a linen cocktail napkin, playing her part flawlessly from the front row. "The top specialists in the state have informed us that she is no longer capable of managing her own affairs." Deshawn continued, his voice cracking with expertly faked emotion. "She requires extensive long-term psychiatric care. Because I love her fiercely, I cannot allow the legacy she built to crumble while she fights this terrible illness. Therefore, it breaks my heart to announce Zuri's immediate early retirement. Effective tomorrow morning, I will be stepping in as the interim CEO of her company, wielding full legal and financial power of attorney to protect her assets until she is well again." The crowd actually clapped. They applauded his bravery. They applauded his dedication to his supposedly insane wife. I did not wait for the applause to die down. I signaled the head sound technician standing in the wings, a man I had personally paid $20,000 in untraceable cash just 2 hours prior. He immediately cut the soft instrumental background music. I stepped out from behind the heavy velvet curtains and walked directly into the blinding spotlight. The collective gasp from the ballroom was deafening. The polite applause died instantly, replaced by stunned, absolute silence. Hundreds of eyes locked onto the crimson gowns sweeping across the stage. I walked with total, absolute precision. My posture was flawless. My eyes were locked entirely onto my husband. The color drained from Deshawn's face so fast he looked physically ill. His jaw went slack and the microphone in his hand trembled violently. He looked at me as if I were a demon rising from the dirt. I walked right up to him. I reached out and firmly wrapped my fingers around the microphone, pulling it smoothly from his paralyzed grip. I turned to face the silent, shocked audience. "Thank you, husband," I said, my voice ringing out crisp, powerful, and entirely lucid. That was a truly beautiful speech. So heartfelt, so tragic. "There is just one tiny problem with your narrative." I took a slow, deliberate step forward, ensuring every single person in the room could see the absolute clarity in my eyes. "My memory issues mysteriously vanished the day I stopped taking the horse tranquilizers you crushed into my daily vitamins." Total, absolute pandemonium erupted in the ballroom. People gasped out loud in sheer horror. Someone dropped a champagne glass, and the sharp sound of shattering crystal echoed sharply through the massive room. Deshaun lunged forward, his eyes wide with sheer panic, reaching desperately for the microphone. "Zuri, what are you doing?" he hissed, his voice a frantic, terrified whisper. "You are sick. You are hallucinating." I easily sidestepped his desperate grasp. I raised my left hand and gave a sharp, definitive nod to the AV booth at the back of the room. The sound technician hit the main switch. The three massive high-definition projector screens suspended behind the stage instantly flickered to life. Instead of the gala's charity logo, the screens displayed the stark black and white infrared footage from my son's nursery baby monitor. The digital timestamp in the corner proved the recording was just a few days old. The video loomed 50 feet high over the audience. It showed Deshaun standing in the nursery holding a small clear plastic bag of white powder. Gwendolyn stood right beside him, holding a glass of my favorite nighttime tea. The audio blasted through the ballroom speakers, echoing loudly off the crystal chandeliers. "Are you absolutely sure this dose is strong enough?" Gwendolyn's voice boomed through the speakers, dripping with malice. "She needs to be completely incoherent by the time Dr. Sterling gets here to evaluate her. If she sounds even slightly rational, he will not be able to justify the emergency psychiatric hold." Deshaun's voice echoed back loud and clear. "Relax, Ma. This is a heavy veterinary-grade sedative I got from Sterling's old supplier. I have been slipping it into her morning vitamins for weeks to build up the brain fog. This concentrated dose in her tea will completely knock her out. She will not even know her own name tomorrow. I will have the financial power of attorney signed and the Savannah property transferred to my hedge fund before she even wakes up. Just keep your voice down so the monitor does not pick this up." The video paused, freezing on a massive 50-foot image of Deshaun pouring the white powder directly into my drink. The ballroom descended into utter chaos. Shouts of horror and disgust erupted from the crowd. The wealthy executives who had just applauded his bravery were now staring at Deshaun with absolute revulsion. He was exposed not as a tragic, supportive husband, but as a calculating predator poisoning his own wife to steal her hard-earned assets. Deshaun's senior partners were already backing away from the stage, their faces pale with the realization of the massive legal and public relations nightmare currently unfolding. Deshaun stumbled backward, gripping the wooden podium to keep from collapsing. His chest heaved and sweat beaded rapidly on his forehead. "Turn it off," he screamed wildly, waving his hands at the AV booth. "Turn that off right now. It is fake. It is a deep fake. She is crazy." Nobody believed him. The evidence was irrefutable, raw, and devastatingly real. I kept my posture rigid, holding the microphone steady. I was not finished. The Shadow Protocol required total annihilation of every single threat to my son's future. I let my eyes sweep across the front row of VIP tables until I found exactly who I was looking for. Dominique was frozen in her seat, clutching her husband Terrence's arm. The massive diamond tennis necklace glittered brightly against her collarbone, mocking the very foundation of my family. She tried to sink lower into her chair, desperately trying to avoid the intense spotlight that was currently burning her brother alive. I walked to the very edge of the stage, looking directly down at her. The entire room followed my gaze. "By the way, Dominique," I said, my voice slicing through the chaotic murmurs of the crowd like a surgical blade, "that is a truly breathtaking diamond necklace you are wearing tonight. It catches the ambient light perfectly." Dominique's eyes widened in terror. She let go of Terrence's arm and brought her hands up to cover the jewels, her breathing turning rapid and shallow. "Zuri, please," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the crowd. "But I am afraid you are not going to be wearing it for much longer." I continued, my tone conversational, yet dripping with lethal intent. "Because the Atlanta Police Department Fraud Division is currently waiting in the lobby to confiscate it." Terrence shot out of his chair, his face draining of all color. "What are you talking about?" he demanded, trying to sound tough but failing miserably. "I bought that for my wife with my own commission." I laughed, a harsh, humorless sound that echoed loudly into the microphone. "You have not closed a real estate commission in 6 months, Terrence. Your boutique brokerage is drowning in corporate debt. That necklace was purchased for exactly $50,000 using funds illegally wired out of my 1-year-old son's educational trust account." The bank traced the wire transfer directly to your personal account yesterday afternoon. You are both wearing stolen property. Dominique let out a loud, horrified shriek, grabbing the diamond necklace and frantically trying to unclasp it as if the jewels were suddenly burning her skin. Terence looked wildly toward the exit doors, but two uniformed police officers had already stepped into the ballroom, standing resolutely at the main aisles, blocking any path of escape. Gwendolyn, who was sitting at the adjacent table, jumped up, pointing a trembling, manic finger at me. "You ungrateful little witch!" she shrieked, abandoning all pretense of high society elegance. "We gave you everything. We elevated you. You are destroying this family." I looked down at the woman who had tried to have my baby taken away by the state. "I did not destroy this family, Gwendolyn," I replied, my voice cold and absolute. "I am just fumigating my house." Deshaun let out a primal, desperate yell. He abandoned the podium and lunged across the stage, sprinting directly toward me with his hands outstretched and his eyes completely unhinged. He was not trying to grab the microphone anymore. He was trying to grab me. He never made it. Two private event security guards in heavy black suits intercepted him right as his fingers grazed the fabric of my crimson gown. They tackled him hard against the wooden podium, sending the microphone stand crashing onto the polished stage floor. The deafening screech of audio feedback blasted through the ballroom speakers, causing hundreds of wealthy guests to cover their ears and scream in panic. In the ensuing chaos, Deshaun scrambled to his feet, his bespoke midnight blue tuxedo jacket torn at the shoulder. His eyes were completely wild, rolling with the frantic, manic energy of a cornered animal. Before the security guards could regain their footing, he lunged forward again, this time managing to wrap his large hand around my upper arm like a vice. Terence materialized from the panicked crowd, rushing up the side stairs of the stage with his head down. Together, the two men physically forced me backward, pushing me through the heavy velvet blackout curtains and shoving me through a set of double doors. We stumbled into the VIP green room, just off the main stage. The heavy, soundproof doors slammed shut behind us, instantly muting the chaotic screams and the shattering glass of the ballroom. The green room was starkly bright, lined with harsh vanity mirrors and cheap leather couches. The sudden silence in the room was absolute and terrifying. Deshaun released my arm and backed away, pacing the length of the room, with his hands clutching his head. He was hyperventilating, his chest heaving violently under his ruined silk shirt. He kept muttering to himself, completely unable to process the absolute public annihilation of his carefully constructed life. Terence, however, did not pace. He stepped directly into my personal space, his face flushed and ugly mottled red. Spit flew from his lips as he screamed. "You ruined my wife, Zuri. You completely humiliated her in front of the entire city. The police are out there right now asking questions about a necklace, and you think you have won. You think you are so incredibly smart." I stood my ground, smoothing the invisible wrinkles from my silk gown. I looked at Terence with nothing but pure, unadulterated disgust. "I did not ruin Dominique," I said, my voice dangerously low and steady. "Dominique ruined herself the second she decided to wear stolen diamonds bought with my child's money." Terence let out a harsh, desperate laugh, kicking a plastic trash can across the green room. "Your child's money." He mocked, his voice cracking with intense, bitter rage. "You have more money than you know what to do with. You always thought you were so much better than me, just because you built a little lotion company. You sat at every single Thanksgiving dinner listening to me talk about my real estate dreams, and you just smiled your fake, arrogant smile." He stepped closer, pointing a trembling finger right between my eyes. "You watched me fail my real estate licensing exams 3 separate times, Zuri. You watched my boutique brokerage drown in corporate debt. I begged you for a measly $50,000 seed loan to keep my business afloat 3 years ago, and you looked me dead in the eye and told me to earn my own capital. You refused to write a single check to help your own family. So yes, I helped Deshaun forge those land deeds. I found the crooked notary in Buckhead who stamped the paperwork. I set up the high-risk commercial lender. I orchestrated the entire transfer of your precious Savannah land, and I am finalizing the leverage tomorrow morning to cover all my debts." He leaned in close, his breath smelling sour and metallic with fear. "You owe us that land, Zuri. You owe us for making us feel like failures. Tomorrow the bank will seize your grandfather's dirt and we are going to walk away clean." I stared at the two men. Deshaun had stopped pacing and was leaning against the vanity mirror, nodding along with Terrence's unhinged confession. They truly believed they held the ultimate trump card. They honestly thought the forged documents locked inside Marcus Sterling's briefcase meant they still controlled my destiny. The sheer staggering weight of their arrogance required a very specific response. I did not scream, I did not cry, I did not threaten them with the police. Instead, I threw my head back and I laughed. It was a rich, throaty, genuine laugh that bounced off the soundproof walls of the green room. I laughed until my ribs ached and tears pricked the corners of my eyes. Deshaun and Terrence exchanged a confused, panicked glance. My reaction was completely shattering their reality. They expected me to beg for my ancestral land. They expected me to negotiate. What is so funny? Terrence demanded, his voice losing its aggressive edge, replaced by a sudden, creeping uncertainty. What are you laughing at? I took a slow, deliberate breath, regaining my composure. I looked at my husband, the man who had secretly crushed veterinary sedatives into my morning vitamins. I looked at his brother-in-law, the man who had actively conspired to forge my signature and steal my family legacy. I am laughing at your profound stupidity, Terrence, I said, crossing my arms over my chest. I am laughing because you two spent months planning an elaborate corporate heist, completely blind to the fact that there was nothing left to steal. Deshaun pushed off the vanity mirror, his brow furrowing deeply. What are you talking about, Zuri? He rasped, his voice hoarse. I have the signed power of attorney. I have the corporate addendums. I have the Savannah land deeds. Dr. Sterling took them directly to the vault. I control your assets. You control absolutely nothing, Deshaun, I replied, my tone dropping to a whisper that commanded the entire room. 3 years ago, when Terrence first asked me for that $50,000 handout, I saw the raw, entitled greed in his eyes. And more importantly, I saw you defending him. I saw you looking at my bank accounts not as our shared future, but as your personal bailout fund. I realized right then that your family viewed my success as a shared lottery ticket. So I did what any smart CEO does. I protected my investments. I slowly began to pace the room, my heels clicking sharply against the linoleum floor. I hired an independent forensic accountant from Chicago and a premier trust attorney from New York. I did not use anyone in Atlanta because I knew you would monitor my local meetings. I established a highly restrictive, irrevocable blind trust headquartered in Delaware. I transferred every single tangible asset I owned into that trust. Terrence swallowed hard, the color draining completely from his face. A blind trust, he repeated dumbly. Yes, Terrence, I said, stopping right in front of him. A blind trust. It means I am the sole beneficiary, but I have absolutely no legal control or direct ownership over the assets within it. The trust is managed entirely by a faceless corporate entity, which means, Deshaun, that my signature, the one you so carefully forged on those commercial loan documents, is legally worthless. I turned to my husband, watching his entire world collapse in real time. You cannot leverage the Savannah land, Deshaun, because Zuri Henderson does not own the Savannah land. The Delaware Trust owns it. You cannot seize voting rights in my skincare empire because Zuri Henderson does not hold direct shares. The trust holds them. Any document bearing my personal signature regarding the transfer of those specific assets is nothing more than a blank, useless piece of paper. Deshaun's knees actually buckled. He slid down the vanity mirror until he hit the floor, sitting hard against the cheap linoleum. He stared at his trembling hands. When your high-risk commercial lender runs the final title check on the Savannah property tomorrow morning, I continued, showing them absolutely no mercy. They are not going to find my name. They are going to find a corporate trust that will immediately flag your paperwork as a catastrophic forgery. The bank's legal department will notify federal authorities before lunchtime. You did not just forge my name, Terrence. You attempted to defraud a federally insured commercial lender for $15 million. You are both looking at federal wire fraud and bank fraud charges. Terrence let out a pathetic, whining sound, covering his face with his hands. He backed into the corner of the room, sliding down the wall, just like Deshaun. They were two broken men sitting on the floor of a green room, realizing they had willingly walked into a federal prison sentence. I looked down at them, feeling an overwhelming sense of vindication. "You thought I was just a naive girl from Decatur who got lucky," I said, my voice echoing with quiet authority. "You thought you could drug me, gaslight me, and strip me of my empire. But I built my kingdom from the dirt up. I know every single stone in my foundation. You never stood a chance." For a long, tense moment, the only sound in the room was Terrence's panicked hyperventilation. Then slowly Deshaun raised his head. His eyes were red-rimmed and bloodshot, but the panic had suddenly vanished. In its place was a look of pure, concentrated malice. He reached into his ruined tuxedo jacket and pulled out his cell phone. He looked at the screen, his thumbs flying rapidly across the digital keyboard. He typed with furious, desperate speed. He was a cornered snake striking out with his final drop of venom. "You think you are so smart, Zuri?" Deshaun hissed, his voice a low, guttural growl. "You think you planned for every single contingency. You protected your company and your precious dirt. But you forgot one massive detail. I am your wealth manager. I control the joint operational accounts. I manage the liquid cash we use for daily living, the mortgage, the car payments, Zion's immediate pediatric funds." He hit a final buttons on his phone screen with a sharp, aggressive tap. He looked up at me, a sick, desperate smile twisting his handsome face into something grotesque. "I just triggered an emergency security protocol on our joint portfolio," he sneered, holding the phone up so I could see the red lock icon glowing on his screen. "I reported suspicious fraudulent activity. I transferred every single liquid dollar into an offshore holding account that only I can access. The bank will freeze the remaining joint accounts pending a 30-day fraud investigation. Your credit cards will decline. Your debit cards are dead. You cannot buy a cup of coffee right now, Zuri." He forced himself up off the floor, leaning heavily against the vanity counter. He pointed his phone at me like a weapon. "You might own a trust in Delaware, but you cannot access that capital without triggering a massive legal review that will take months. Right now, tonight, you have zero cash. You have no way to pay for a hotel. You have no way to feed our son. You beat me in the boardroom, Zuri, but you are walking out of this Ritz-Carlton with absolutely nothing. You are homeless." I looked down at the glowing red screen of his phone and let out a soft, genuine sigh of pity. I reached out and gently patted his torn velvet lapel. "Deshaun," I murmured, my voice dripping with absolute condescension. "Did you really think a woman smart enough to build a $15 million blind trust would leave her liquid assets sitting in a joint checking account managed by a man she was actively investigating?" Deshaun blinked heavily, his brain struggling to process the words. He stared at the error messages beginning to pop up on his customized banking application. "I initiated a legal corporate restructuring protocol 48 hours ago," I explained, speaking slowly as if addressing a particularly slow child. "I drained every single joint account we shared. I transferred the capital into a secure private corporate account, registered under my maiden name and protected by my new legal team. I left exactly one single dollar in the joint ledger just to keep the routing numbers active so the bank algorithms would not flag a sudden closure." His mouth fell open, a silent gasp of pure horror escaping his throat. "That offshore transfer you just frantically initiated," I continued, my tone completely flat and devoid of any mercy. "You just moved exactly 50 cents to the Cayman Islands. You paid a $40 wire transfer fee to move 50 cents. Congratulations on your massive financial victory, husband. You really showed me who is boss." I did not wait to watch the final fragments of his sanity shatter. I turned on my stiletto heels and walked out of the green room, leaving the two of them suffocating in the dark. I glided through the opulent lobby of the Ritz-Carlton, ignoring the frantic whispers and staring eyes of the gala attendees, who were still reeling from the horrific video broadcast. The crisp night air hit my face as I stepped out the heavy glass doors. My private armored SUV was waiting at the curb, its engine humming softly. I climbed into the luxurious leather interior and instructed my driver to head straight to Buckhead. The night was far from over. The demolition was only just beginning. The streets of Atlanta were quiet as we drove toward the towering glass skyscrapers of the financial district. I stared out the tinted windows, feeling an absolute icy calm radiating through my veins. For years, I had played the role of the dutiful, grateful wife. I had allowed Deshaun and his pretentious family to subtly mock my working-class roots while they shamelessly drained my resources to fund their fabricated royal lifestyle. They had mistaken my quiet grace for weakness. Now they were going to learn that the girl who fought her way out of Decatur knew exactly how to dismantle an empire brick by brick. My driver pulled into the secure underground parking garage of a massive corporate high-rise. I took the private executive elevator directly to the 40th floor. The doors slid silently open to reveal the sprawling, immaculate offices of Davis and Associates. This was not a standard family law practice. This was a corporate litigation firm known for completely destroying fraudulent executives. Standing in the center of the massive glass-walled conference room was Evelyn Davis. She was the most ruthless financial litigator in the entire state of Georgia. She wore a tailored charcoal suit and a predatory smile. Spread across the massive polished mahogany conference table were hundreds of printed pages, illuminated by the harsh overhead lighting. "Right on time," Zuri Ms. Davis said, gesturing to the chair across from her. "I trust the gala was appropriately entertaining." "It was highly educational," I replied, taking a seat and resting my hands on the cool surface of the table. "Deshaun and Terrence just confessed to the forgery in the green room. They are completely unaware of the blind trust. They still think they have leverage." Ms. Davis let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "They are going to need a lot more than leverage by tomorrow morning. My team just finished compiling the raw data from the forensic audit you authorized on Deshaun's wealth management firm. We cracked his encrypted ledgers 3 days ago, and the results are worse than we initially projected. Much worse." She slid a thick, heavily tabbed binder across the table. I opened the cover and began scanning the highlighted spreadsheets. I had suspected Deshaun was skimming from his corporate accounts to cover his failing hedge fund, but the numbers in front of me told a completely different, entirely terrifying story. "Look at the third tab," Ms. Davis instructed, tapping a manicured finger against the paper. "Deshaun has not just been mismanaging corporate funds, Zuri. He has been systematically embezzling millions of dollars directly from his own clients. Specifically, he targeted the portfolios of his oldest, most vulnerable clients, elderly widows, retirees with cognitive decline, and trust accounts belonging to minors. He created a web of fake shell companies and billed them for phantom management fees, moving the stolen capital into offshore accounts." My blood ran cold as I traced the routing numbers with my finger. The sheer scale of the theft was staggering. He was not just a terrible husband, he was an absolute monster preying on the weak to line his own pockets. But where did it all go? I asked, my eyes scanning the massive withdrawal columns. Even with a failing hedge fund, this is an exorbitant amount of stolen liquid cash. Ms. Davis smiled, her eyes glinting with lethal satisfaction. "Flip to the next page. We tracked the disbursements from the offshore accounts. The money did not go into his hedge fund, Zuri. It went directly into funding his mother and his sister." I stared at the heavily documented paper trail, completely paralyzed by the sheer audacity of what I was reading. Gwendolyn Henderson, the self-appointed queen of Atlanta's black elite, had built her entire persona on stolen elderly pensions. The audit showed Deshaun using embezzled funds to pay for Gwendolyn's monthly country club dues, her custom-imported Range Rover, her massive mortgage on the Cascade Mansion, and her weekly high-end shopping sprees. Dominique was no better. The documents proved Deshaun had been quietly paying off her massive credit card debts for years. Her designer bags, her first-class vacations to Europe, and the down payment on her sprawling suburban home were all funded by the retirement savings of innocent people. They paraded around the city, acting like generational royalty, treating everyone around them like dirt, while secretly surviving on the proceeds of massive federal felonies. Their entire existence was a criminal mirage. "They called me cheap," I whispered, staring at the staggering lists of fraudulent wire transfers. "They mocked me for wearing vintage clothes and driving a standard sedan while I was building my company. They told me I did not know how to act like a woman of wealth." Miss Davis leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table. "They are parasites, Zuri. And tomorrow morning, I am submitting this entire forensic dossier to the Securities and Exchange Commission, the FBI, and the local district attorney. Deshaun is looking at a minimum of 20 years in federal prison. Gwendolyn and Dominique will be indicted as co-conspirators and recipients of stolen property. The federal government will seize the Cascade Mansion, the cars, the jewelry, and every single designer bag they own to pay back the victims. They are going to lose absolutely everything. I closed the binder, feeling a profound, overwhelming sense of justice. The nightmare was finally ending, but as I sat back in the leather chair, my mind drifted back to the pathetic, sniveling man sitting on the floor of the Ritz-Carlton green room. Terrence. He had screamed in my face, blaming me for his own failures. He had admitted to helping Deshaun forge the deeds to my sacred family land just to cover his own pathetic debts. I looked up at Ms. Davis. "What about Terrence?" I asked, my voice hardening. "What did the audit uncover about his boutique real estate brokerage?" Ms. Davis flipped to the very back of the binder, pulling out a separate, thinner file. "Terrence is a spectacular failure," she stated bluntly. "He has not closed a legitimate property deal in 8 months. His brokerage is completely underwater. He took out massive predatory corporate loans from a private equity firm in Chicago to keep the lights on and maintain his fake baller lifestyle. He is currently in default. The private equity firm is preparing to call in his debt by the end of the week. If he cannot produce $2.5 million in cash by Friday, they are going to force his brokerage into bankruptcy and seize his personal assets." A slow, dangerous idea began to form in my mind. The ultimate counterpunch. I had spent years watching Terrence swagger through my home wearing expensive suits he could not afford, acting like he was a titan of industry, while secretly begging my husband for stolen handouts. He wanted to destroy my legacy to save his own fragile ego. It was time to show him what a real titan of industry looked like. "Ms. Davis," I said, sitting up perfectly straight. "2 weeks ago, I instructed you to set up an untraceable anonymous LLC in Nevada for my future philanthropic ventures. Is that corporate entity fully funded and operational?" "Yes," Ms. Davis replied, looking at me with sudden, intense curiosity. "The Nevada LLC is completely untraceable to your name. It has $50 million in liquid capital sitting in a secure holding account. Why do you ask?" "I want you to contact that private equity firm in Chicago right now," I commanded, tapping my finger rhythmically against the mahogany table. "I do not care what time it is. Wake them up. I want my anonymous Nevada LLC to aggressively purchase all of Terrence's outstanding corporate debt. Offer them a 10% premium on the principal balance for an immediate cash transfer tonight." Ms. Davis's eyes widened in realization, a slow, predatory grin spreading across her sharp features. "You want to buy his debt." "I want to own him," I corrected, my voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "If my LLC owns his commercial debt, I become his sole primary creditor. I become the entity holding the absolute power over his financial survival." Ms. Davis immediately pulled her laptop toward her, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "Consider it done, Zuri. By sunrise, your anonymous corporation will hold every single note on his failing brokerage." "Excellent," I said, standing up from the table and smoothing my crimson gown. "Terrence said he was going to leverage my Savannah land tomorrow morning to cover his debts. He thinks he is going to walk into his office and play the big shot savior. I want to be there when he realizes the truth." I picked up my phone and drafted a highly encrypted message to my private security team. The game was no longer about simple defense. It was about total, absolute territorial dominance. Deshaun was going to prison, Gwendolyn and Dominique were going to lose their fake elite lifestyle, and Terrence was about to find out that the woman he despised, the woman he tried to steal from, was now his absolute master. I walked out of the conference room, the sharp click of my stilettos echoing like a countdown clock in the silent marble hallway. The sun was going to rise over Atlanta in a few hours, and it was going to illuminate the ruins of the Henderson family. I had secured my son. I had protected my empire. The Shadow Protocol was moving into its final terminal phase. The morning sun crested the Atlanta skyline, casting a harsh, unforgiving light over the city as my armored SUV pulled out of the underground parking garage. I did not go home to rest. Sleep was a luxury I could not afford, while a wounded predator was still breathing. Deshaun was cornered. His joint accounts were frozen, his fraudulent land deeds were worthless, and his massive embezzlement scheme was sitting in a neatly bound binder on my lap. A cornered narcissist relies on a singular survival tactic. They seek out a larger host to drain. I knew exactly where Deshaun would go. He would run directly to the apex of his professional food chain. By noon, my private security detail intercepted a series of frantic text messages sent from Deshaun's encrypted phone to Arthur Vance, the chief executive officer of his wealth management firm. Deshaun was bleeding cash and suffocating under the weight of his collapsing reality. He had begged Arthur for an emergency sit-down dinner at the ultra-exclusive Buckhead Country Club. His message was a pathetic masterpiece of manipulation, citing a sudden catastrophic medical emergency regarding my mental health and pleading for an immediate advance on his year-end bonus to cover my supposed institutional care. Deshaun wanted a multi-million-dollar lifeline to flee the sinking ship he had built. He was going to use my fabricated insanity to fund his escape. I spent the afternoon securing my next weapon. Her name was Jada. She was a local Instagram model, a fixture in the Atlanta nightlife scene, and more importantly, Dominique's absolute best friend. Jada was the woman who had helped Dominique pick out her wedding dress. She was the woman who attended every single Henderson family barbecue. And according to the forensic audit, she was also the woman who had been sleeping with my husband for the past 2 years. Deshaun had been keeping Jada in a massive luxury penthouse in Midtown, paying her exorbitant rent using the funds he actively embezzled from his elderly clients. Finding Jada was effortless. Convincing her to join my war party took exactly 5 minutes. I simply sat across from her in a dark VIP booth at a local lounge and slid a copy of Deshaun's frozen offshore accounts across the table. I watched her perfectly contoured face twist into a mask of pure panic as I explained that her sugar daddy was completely, utterly broke. The federal authorities were preparing to seize her penthouse and every single designer bag Deshaun had bought her with stolen money. Jada did not possess an ounce of loyalty to Dominique or Deshaun. Her only loyalty was to the highest bidder. I offered her complete legal immunity from the impending federal indictment if she accompanied me to the country club. She agreed instantly. At precisely 7 in the evening, I walked through the towering mahogany doors of the Buckhead Country Club. I wore a tailored black power suit with sharp padded shoulders and a silk emerald blouse radiating absolute total authority. Jada walked right beside me wearing a skin-tight silver cocktail dress that turned the head of every single wealthy patron in the dining room. We did not wait for the maitre d' to seat us. I spotted them immediately. Deshaun and Arthur Vance were seated at a secluded corner booth, surrounded by dark oak paneling and vintage oil paintings. As we approached the table, I could hear Deshaun's voice dripping with manufactured grief. He was leaning across the white linen tablecloth, his hands clasped together in a pleading gesture. He was wearing a fresh suit, trying desperately to look put together, despite the dark circles carving deep canyons under his eyes. "Arthur, you have to understand the immense pressure I am under," Deshaun was saying, his voice cracking with calculated sorrow. "Zuri has completely lost her mind. The doctors are demanding millions in upfront residential care fees. I have dedicated my entire life to this firm. I just need an immediate advance on my capital distributions to save my wife." Arthur Vance, a silver-haired billionaire with a reputation for absolute ruthlessness, looked at Deshaun with a mixture of pity and hesitation. He opened his mouth to reply, but I stepped directly into his line of sight, pulling out a chair and sitting down right next to my husband. Jada slid into the plush leather booth on the opposite side, trapping Deshaun between us. "Good evening, Arthur," I said, my voice smooth and resonant, cutting through the ambient clinking of crystal glasses. "I am Zuri Henderson, the supposedly insane wife who requires millions in institutional care. I assure you my mind is exceptionally clear tonight." Deshaun violently recoiled, pressing his back flat against the leather booth. The remaining color drained from his face, leaving his skin an ashen, sickly gray. His eyes darted wildly from my face to Jada's silver dress, and the sudden realization of his total exposure hit him like a physical blow. He opened his mouth to speak, but only a strangled, pathetic wheeze escaped his throat. "Zuri," Arthur said, blinking in absolute shock. He looked from Deshawn to me, his sharp corporate instincts instantly detecting the massive deception unfolding at his table. "Deshawn just informed me you were suffering from a severe psychiatric break. He said you were currently incapacitated." "Deshawn says a lot of things, Arthur," I replied, keeping my tone perfectly conversational. "He says he is a faithful husband. He says he is a brilliant wealth manager. He says he is an honest man. Unfortunately for you, every single word that comes out of his mouth is a catastrophic liability to your firm." I reached into my sleek leather tote bag and pulled out the thick, heavy binder containing the complete forensic audit. I dropped it squarely onto the center of the white linen tablecloth. It landed with a heavy, resounding thud that rattled the expensive silverware. I slid it directly over to Arthur. "I suggest you review those documents very carefully, Arthur," I commanded, leaning forward and resting my forearms on the table. "Because your star wealth manager is not sitting here begging for a bonus to cure my mental illness. He is begging for a massive cash injection to flee the country. Deshawn has spent the last 3 years systematically embezzling millions of dollars from your firm's most vulnerable elderly clients. He created fraudulent shell companies, routed pension funds through dummy accounts, and used your corporate infrastructure to steal from widows." Arthur Vance's eyes widened in sheer horror. He snatched the binder off the table and flipped it open, his eyes scanning the highlighted routing numbers, the forged internal transfer requests, and the undeniable digital footprint of Deshawn's massive federal crimes. The blood rushed to Arthur's face, his jaw tightening as the true scale of the institutional liability became violently clear. "It is a lie," Deshawn stammered wildly, holding his hands up in a placating gesture. "Arthur, listen to me. She is crazy. She fabricated all of this. I have never stolen a single dime." "Shut your mouth, Deshawn." Jada snapped, her voice slicing through the dining room with absolute venom. Deshawn froze, turning his head to look at his sister's best friend. He looked entirely pathetic, sweating through his expensive suit, completely trapped in a nightmare of his own making. Jada grabbed her full crystal martini glass from the table. She looked at Deshawn with pure, unadulterated disgust. "You lied to me," she hissed, her voice carrying loudly to the neighboring tables. "You told me you were leaving Zuri. You told me you were a multimillionaire. You paid the lease on my Midtown penthouse with money you stole from grandmothers. You have been sleeping in my bed for 2 years promising me the world, and you are nothing but a broke, pathetic fraud." Without a single second of hesitation, Jada threw her wrist forward, splashing the entire freezing martini directly into Deshawn's face. The liquid hit him with a sharp smack, dripping down his nose and soaking into his pristine white collar. A collective gasp rose from the surrounding wealthy patrons. The ultra-exclusive dining room had turned into a theater of total humiliation. Deshawn sat there, blinking through the stinging alcohol, completely stripped of his dignity, his pride, and his manufactured elite persona. Arthur Vance slammed the heavy forensic binder shut. His eyes burned with absolute, unbridled corporate fury. He looked at Deshawn not as an employee, but as a radioactive threat that needed to be instantly neutralized. "You are done, Deshawn!" Arthur growled, his voice vibrating with lethal intensity. "You are officially terminated effective this exact second. You are banned from the building. You are locked out of the corporate network. I am handing this entire binder directly to the Federal Bureau of Investigation tomorrow morning. If you ever contact me or step foot near my firm again, I will personally ensure you never see the outside of a prison cell." Arthur did not wait for a response. He raised his hand and sharply snapped his fingers, signaling the massive private security guards standing near the dining room entrance. 2 enormous men in tailored suits marched aggressively toward our table. They flanked Deshawn, grabbing him roughly by the arms and hauling him forcefully out of the leather booth. Deshawn thrashed against their grip, but he was completely powerless against their physical strength. They began dragging him backward through the opulent dining room, pulling him past the staring, judging eyes of Atlanta's most powerful citizens. His ruin was absolute. He had lost his firm. He had lost his stolen money. He had lost his mistress. He was facing decades in a federal penitentiary. But as the security guards dragged him toward the heavy mahogany exit doors, Deshaun stopped struggling. He planted his feet against the carpet, forcing the guards to halt for a fraction of a second. He turned his head and looked directly at me, sitting calmly at the table. The panic and the fear were entirely gone. His face had contorted into a mask of pure, unhinged malice. His eyes were dead black voids devoid of any humanity or restraint. He stared at me with the absolute clarity of a man who had absolutely nothing left to lose. "You took my job, Zuri!" Deshaun screamed, his voice a guttural, terrifying roar that echoed violently off the vaulted ceiling. "You took everything from me, so now I am taking the only thing you care about." The security guards shoved him through the doors, silencing his screams, but the threat hung in the air like a physical weight. My blood turned to absolute ice. The corporate warfare was over. Deshaun was no longer fighting for money or pride. He was fighting for blood. He was going for Zion. I stood up from the table, my heart hammering violently against my ribs, breaking into a full, desperate sprint toward the exit. The final war had just begun. My diamond-studded heels hammered against the Ritz-Carlton pavement as I sprinted toward my waiting armored SUV. Deshaun's final threat echoed viciously in my ears, but my panic was brief and fiercely contained. I had already built an impenetrable physical and legal fortress around my son Zion. I threw myself into the luxurious leather back seat and immediately dialed the commander of my elite private security detail. The commander's voice was calm, steady, and entirely reassuring. Deshaun had not even made it within 3 miles of my estate. Local police, acting on the massive forensic dossier Evelyn Davis had submitted hours earlier, had intercepted his vehicle on the highway. Deshaun was currently sitting in the back of a Fulton County squad car in heavy steel handcuffs, facing multiple federal embezzlement charges. Zion was safely asleep in his nursery, surrounded by armed professionals, completely untouched by the madness his father had unleashed. I let out a long, trembling breath, leaning my head against the cool, tinted window. The king had officially fallen, and his queen mother was living on borrowed time. Now it was time to sweep the rest of the board. Sunday morning broke over Atlanta with crisp, mocking perfection. The bright sunlight bathed Dominique's sprawling $6 million suburban mansion in warm, golden light. This house was the crown jewel of her entirely fabricated identity. It was a massive European-style chateau with manicured hedges, tall marble fountains, and a sweeping circular driveway packed with imported sports cars. Today, it was the setting for her highly publicized seasonal brunch. She had invited 20 of Atlanta's most elite, influential society wives to sip premium imported champagne and admire her supposedly flawless life. I knew the exact layout of the event from the pretentious gold foil invitations she had flaunted weeks ago. The brunch was taking place on her expansive travertine patio overlooking a pristine, shimmering infinity pool. Dominique was dressed in a flowing designer silk caftan, playing the ultimate gracious host to perfection. Caterers in crisp white uniforms circulated silently with silver trays of caviar, topped blinis, fresh truffle shavings, and artisan pastries. At the center of it all sat Gwendolyn. She was holding court at the main decorated table, a peach mimosa in one hand and a diamond-encrusted fork in the other. She was loudly bragging about the Henderson family legacy, spinning intricate lies about their massive investment portfolios and supposed generational wealth. I could hear her shrill voice boasting about a fabricated upcoming family trip to Monaco. She was completely oblivious to the fact that her primary source of stolen income was currently sitting in a federal holding cell without bail. Dominique was equally oblivious. Terrence had clearly hidden his impending absolute financial ruin from her, desperately hoping to somehow secure the cash before the private equity firm called in his massive debt. They were both suffocating in a beautiful, fragile illusion of grandeur that I was about to violently shatter. My black armored Range Rover glided silently past the tall iron front gates. The security codes had not been changed. Terrence was far too arrogant and disorganized to remember basic residential security protocols. My driver parked directly behind a row of luxury sedans, deliberately blocking the circular exit. I stepped out of the vehicle, adjusting the crisp cuffs of my tailored ivory blazer. I wanted to look pristine, untouchable, and entirely in control of their destruction. I was not walking into this battle alone. Flanking me were two broad-shouldered Fulton County Sheriff's deputies, their duty belts heavy with authority. I had arranged their presence early this morning, presenting the legally binding foreclosure documents and eviction notices expedited by Evelyn Davis and my anonymous Nevada LLC. We bypassed the ornate mahogany front doors and walked directly around the side of the massive estate, following the sound of clinking crystal and shrill laughter. We stepped onto the sunlit travertine patio, like a dark storm rolling across a clear summer sky. The professional caterers froze mid-step, their trays hovering in mid-air. The ambient, lively chatter of 20 wealthy society wives died instantly. The sudden, heavy silence that swept across the patio was absolute and terrifying. Dominique stopped mid-laugh, her delicate champagne flute hovering inches from her glossy lips. She stared at me and the two uniformed armed deputies, her carefully contoured face dropping into an expression of sheer, unadulterated terror. Gwendolyn practically choked on her mimosa, her eyes darting frantically between my flawless ivory suit and the heavy-duty tactical gear worn by my stern escorts. "Zuri," Dominique stammered, her voice tight and abnormally high-pitched. "What are you doing here? This is a private catered event, and why did you bring the police onto my property?" I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. The patio was so violently quiet you could hear the water rippling softly over the edge of the infinity pool. "I sincerely apologize for interrupting your lovely Sunday brunch, ladies," I said, addressing the crowd of terrified silent socialites before turning my absolute lethal focus onto Dominique. But as the new legal owner of this entire property, I felt it was absolutely necessary to inspect my latest investment. Dominique let out a shrill, nervous laugh, looking around at her wealthy friends for any sign of support. "You are completely insane, Zuri. My husband owns this estate. Terrence bought this house free and clear. Terrence leased this house using massive predatory corporate loans he could never actually afford to repay." I corrected my tone, dropping to a lethal, icy calm that commanded the entire space. "Loans he explicitly defaulted on months ago. Yesterday morning, a private investment firm in Chicago sold the entirety of his toxic commercial debt to an anonymous LLC based in Nevada. I am the sole exclusive owner of that LLC. I own every single cent of your husband's debt, Dominique. Furthermore, the federal forensic audit conducted on your brother's wealth management firm proves undeniably that your initial mortgage down payment was funded entirely by stolen elderly pension funds. Terrence committed massive federal fraud to buy you this illusion." The collective gasps from the society wives were loud and audible. Several women subtly pushed their wrought iron chairs back physically, distancing themselves from the blast zone of Dominique's ruin. I saw at least 8 cell phones discreetly rise from silk-clad laps, their camera lenses pointed directly at us, actively recording every single second of the absolute social carnage. I reached into my sleek leather portfolio and pulled out a thick, heavy stack of legally binding documents, freshly stamped with the county court seal. I walked forward, my heels clicking sharply against the stone, and dropped them squarely onto Dominique's china plate, right on top of her expensive caviar blinis. "This is a formal expedited commercial foreclosure notice," I announced loudly and clearly, ensuring every single recording phone caught the exact words. "Due to the highly fraudulent nature of the initial purchase and the absolute default on the corporate notes, this property has been immediately seized by my firm. You have exactly 24 hours to vacate the premises before my private security team physically removes your belongings to the curb and changes all the locks. You are officially homeless, Dominique." Dominique stared down at the thick legal eviction notice as if it were a venomous snake preparing to strike. Her entire fabricated identity, her elite social standing, her pretentious superiority was disintegrating into dust right in front of her most important peers. She opened her mouth, but absolutely no sound came out. She was completely paralyzed by the sheer crushing magnitude of her public ruin. But Gwendolyn was not paralyzed. The self-appointed reigning queen of Atlanta's black elite refused to go down quietly. Her face turned a violent mottled shade of purple, her eyes bulging with absolute unhinged fury. She had lost her stolen country club dues, her custom-imported cars, her favorite son, and now her daughter's multi-million-dollar mansion, all in less than 24 hours. Her fragile narcissistic ego simply could not process the total utter destruction of her royal facade. "You lying, wretched little ghetto trash!" Gwendolyn shrieked, her voice tearing through the serene Sunday morning air like a broken emergency siren. "You planned all of this from the very beginning. You ruined my brilliant son. You are actively trying to steal my family's historic legacy. I will kill you myself." Gwendolyn violently lunged across the elaborate mimosa bar, knocking over heavy crystal pitchers of fresh orange juice and shattering dozens of expensive champagne flutes. She flew blindly toward me with her manicured hands raised high, aiming a violent, aggressive, open-handed slap directly at my face. I did not panic. I did not even blink. I simply took one smooth, calculated step to the left. Gwendolyn's blind, raging momentum carried her wildly forward. Her swinging hand missed my cheek entirely, slicing only through empty air. Instead, her heavy palm collided with a sickeningly loud wet smack directly against the jaw of the Fulton County Sheriff's deputy standing right behind me. The entire patio immediately erupted into absolute screaming chaos. The society wives shrieked, scrambling frantically out of their chairs and rushing toward the side exits with their phones still recording the glorious madness. The assaulted deputy did not hesitate for a fraction of a second. He grabbed Gwendolyn's wrist, twisting her arm sharply and painfully behind her back. The second deputy immediately stepped in, grabbing her other flailing arm and forcing her forcefully face first down onto the sticky mimosa-soaked travertine patio. "Get your filthy hands off me!" Gwendolyn howled, thrashing wildly and kicking her legs against the cold, hard stone. "Do you have any idea who I am? I am Gwendolyn Henderson. You work for me. You are under arrest for the aggravated assault of a law enforcement officer," the deputy barked, pressing his heavy knee firmly between her shoulder blades as the harsh, sharp, metallic click of steel handcuffs echoed loudly over the ruined patio. I stood perfectly still, smoothing the front of my ivory blazer and watching the glorious scene unfold. Gwendolyn's expensive designer dress was completely ruined, covered in sticky juice and crushed fruit pulp. Her carefully styled hair was a wild, tangled mess. She was screaming, kicking, and sobbing hysterically as the two deputies hauled her roughly to her feet and began dragging her toward the waiting patrol car in the driveway. Dominique remained entirely frozen in her chair, completely unable to save her mother, staring blankly at the legal eviction notice resting in her breakfast. Atlanta's fake royalty was being dragged out in handcuffs, kicking and screaming like a common criminal. I did not stay to watch Dominique sob over the mimosa puddles. I turned on my heel and walked back to my armored Range Rover, leaving the ruined chateau behind me. The rest of the day passed with brutal efficiency. I finalized the transfer of Terrence's commercial debt, ensuring his complete bankruptcy would be legally binding by Monday morning. I checked in with my elite security detail stationed around my son. The perimeter was secure. Zion was safely occupied in his private playroom with his nanny completely isolated from the radioactive fallout of the Henderson family. By midnight, the adrenaline of the morning had settled into a cold, watchful anticipation. Deshaun was a desperate man, stripped of his job, his reputation, and his mistress. He had made a threat, and men like Deshaun always went for the most obvious target when their egos were shattered. He believed my skincare empire was my greatest vulnerability. He was predictably wrong. My encrypted phone vibrated against the glass coffee table at precisely 1 a.m. It was a silent proximity alert from the primary laboratory headquarters of my skincare company, located in an isolated industrial park on the outskirts of the city. Someone had bypassed the outer gate. I did not call the local police. I called the commander of my private security detail, instructing him to meet me at the facility with his heavily armed tactical unit. My driver pushed the Range Rover to its absolute limits, tearing through the empty midnight streets of Atlanta. The laboratory was a massive, sleek building of black glass and reinforced steel. It housed the proprietary formulas, the chemical servers, and the raw data that formed the absolute core of my brand. When I arrived, the security commander was waiting in the shadows near the loading dock. He gave a silent tactical hand signal, indicating that a single intruder had forced entry through a secondary ventilation access point. The intruder was currently moving through the facility toward the central server room. I instructed the security team to fan out and position themselves silently in the adjoining corridors. I wanted to handle this personally. I slipped through the executive entrance and walked silently down the pitch-black hallway. The server room was a massive temperature-controlled vault, located at the very heart of the building. The heavy reinforced door had been brutally forced open, its electronic lock completely smashed. I stood in the doorway, letting my eyes adjust to the darkness. Standing in the center of the room, illuminated only by the faint blue blinking lights of the massive server racks, was Deshawn. He was breathing heavily, his expensive suit jacket discarded, his shirt torn and sweat-soaked. In his right hand, he gripped a heavy, solid steel crowbar. He looked completely unhinged, a cornered animal preparing to strike. He raised the crowbar high above his head, aiming directly for the primary storage drive housing the master algorithms for my entire product line. Before he could swing the heavy steel, I spoke, my voice slicing cleanly through the chilled, silent air of the vault. "Put it down, Deshawn." He froze. He slowly lowered his arm and turned around, squinting into the dark corridor. His face contorted into a mask of pure feral hatred. "Zuri." He spat, his voice echoing harshly off the metal walls. "You actually came. I was hoping the silent alarms would bring you running. I wanted you to watch this. I wanted you to see it happen." I stepped over the threshold, crossing my arms calmly over my chest. "You are trespassing on secure property, Deshawn. You are already facing decades in federal prison for embezzling millions from elderly widows. Adding breaking and entering and corporate sabotage to your rap sheet is a terrible legal strategy." He let out a sharp, manic laugh that bordered on hysteria. He took a threatening step toward the server racks, gripping the crowbar with both hands. "Legal strategy." He mocked, his eyes wild and bloodshot. "Do you honestly think I care about a legal strategy right now? You destroyed me, Zuri. You took my career. You humiliated me in front of Arthur Vance. You froze my accounts, and you set the FBI on my mother. My entire life is completely over. I have absolutely nothing left to lose." He raised the crowbar again, aiming it directly at the glass casing of the main server bank. "But you do," he snarled, his chest heaving. "You have this, your precious empire, your brilliant formulas, your flawless legacy. You think you won today, Zuri. You think dragging my mother out in handcuffs made you the victor. But without these servers, your entire company collapses by sunrise. You will have nothing to sell. Your investors will pull out. Your stock will completely tank. If I go down, your empire burns right alongside me." He braced his legs, preparing to smash the glass and destroy the hardware. I did not flinch. I did not beg. I simply reached out and flipped the main breaker switch on the wall. The room was instantly flooded with blinding, harsh fluorescent light. Deshawn winced, raising a hand to shield his eyes from the sudden glare. I smiled at him. It was a slow, lethal smile of absolute total victory. "Smash them," I commanded, gesturing casually toward the towering racks of hardware. "Go ahead, Deshawn. Smash every single one of them. I absolutely do not care." He froze, the crowbar hovering in midair. His brow furrowed in deep confusion. He looked at the servers, then back at me, his mind struggling to process my total lack of panic. "What are you talking about?" he demanded, his voice trembling slightly. "This is your entire life's work." "It was my life's work," I corrected, stepping fully into the bright light. "But I am a businesswoman, Deshawn. I anticipate vulnerabilities. I knew the moment I filed for divorce and locked you out of the joint accounts, you would try to leverage my company against me. You are far too predictable." I walked slowly around the perimeter of the room, keeping my distance from the desperate man holding the steel weapon. "Those servers are completely empty," I explained, my voice ringing with total authority. "They are useless hollow metal shells. I initiated a total data migration protocol exactly 72 hours ago. Every single proprietary formula, every algorithm, every client database, and every patent application was securely transferred to an encrypted offshore cloud network. Deshaun stared at the blinking blue lights, realization slowly dawning in his terrified eyes. But it gets even better, husband. I continued, stopping right in front of the open doorway. Yesterday afternoon, while you were busy trying to extort Arthur Vance at the country club, I finalized the ultimate defensive maneuver. I legally sold the entire company, every formula, every patent, and every physical asset, including this laboratory, to a massive European luxury conglomerate. The wire transfer cleared this morning. They paid $80 million in cash. The crowbar slipped from Deshaun's sweaty grip. It hit the concrete floor with a loud, sharp clang vibrating loudly in the silent room. "You sold it," he whispered, his voice cracking, completely devastated. "You sold the company." $80 million, Deshaun, I repeated, driving the final nail into his psychological coffin. All safely secured in a private trust that you can never touch. But the real tragedy for you tonight is not just the money. You see, by finalizing that sale yesterday, this building is no longer my property. It is officially owned by a powerful international corporation based in Switzerland. I gestured to the empty servers and the broken door. "You are not breaking into your wife's business, Deshaun. You are officially trespassing on international corporate property. You just committed felony corporate espionage against a foreign entity. Their legal team is renowned for being absolutely merciless. They will ensure you never see the sun again." Deshaun stumbled backward, his knees hitting the metal frame of the empty server rack. His breathing became erratic, shallow, and panicked. He looked around the bright, sterile room, finally understanding the absolute magnitude of his failure. He had walked right into a carefully laid trap. There was no leverage. There was no victory. There was only total annihilation. I raised my hand and gave a sharp, definitive nod toward the dark hallway. The sound of heavy tactical boots echoed loudly against the concrete floor. 6 massive security operatives dressed in full black tactical gear poured into the server room. They fanned out instantly, creating an impenetrable wall between me and my husband. "Secure the intruder!" the security commander barked, unholstering his weapon and pointing it directly at Deshaun's chest. "Do not move. Put your hands on your head and drop to your knees." Deshaun looked at the armed men, then looked at the heavy steel crowbar resting on the floor near his feet. The sheer terror in his eyes morphed rapidly into pure adrenaline-fueled survival instinct. He did not drop to his knees. Instead, he let out a wild, desperate roar, grabbed a heavy metal fire extinguisher from the wall mount, and hurled it violently toward the bank of overhead fluorescent lights. The heavy red cylinder smashed directly into the fixtures. The glass shattered, raining down on the security team and plunging the room back into absolute pitch-black darkness. "Stop him!" I shouted, shielding my face from the falling glass. The sound of scuffling bodies, echoing shouts, and heavy boots scrambling in the dark filled the room. The security commander flipped on his high-powered tactical flashlight, sweeping the beam across the vault. The room was empty. The heavy red emergency exit door at the back of the server farm was kicked wide open, swinging wildly on its hinges. The cold night air rushed into the room. Deshaun had sprinted through the fire exit, plunging into the dense woods surrounding the industrial park. "Go after him!" the commander roared, signaling his team to pursue. "Do not let him breach the perimeter." I stood in the center of the dark server room, my heart pounding a steady rhythmic beat against my ribs. He was running, but he could not hide forever. The FBI, the Swiss corporate lawyers, and the local police were all hunting him now. He was a ghost. I took a deep breath, ready to return to the Range Rover and head back to my heavily guarded estate. The war was effectively over. Then my encrypted cell phone rang. The sharp trill of the ringtone echoed jarringly in the silent room. I pulled it from my pocket. The caller ID flashed brightly in the darkness. It was Maria, Zion's trusted night nanny. A sudden cold spike of pure terror pierced directly through my chest. Maria was strictly instructed never to call this personal line unless there was an absolute catastrophic emergency. I swiped the screen and brought the phone to my ear, my hand trembling violently. "Maria!" I demanded, my voice tight with sudden panic. "What is wrong? Is Zion okay?" "Missouri!" Maria sobbed, her voice absolutely hysterical, breathless, and completely terrified. "Maria, talk to me!" I commanded, sprinting out of the server room and rushing down the dark hallway toward the exit. "What happened?" "He is gone." "Missouri?" Maria wailed through the phone. "He took him. He took the baby." My blood turned to absolute ice. The world around me seemed to tilt dangerously, my vision blurring at the edges. "Who took him?" I screamed, sprinting through the loading dock doors and out into the cold night air. The security perimeter was active. How is that possible? "It was Mr. Deshawn!" Maria cried, her words tumbling over each other in sheer panic. "He somehow bypassed the biometric security protocol on the nursery wing. He knew the master override codes for the panic room. The guards did not stop him because the system registered his retinal scan as an authorized primary resident." "No!" I gasped, coming to a dead stop in the parking lot. "No, he is here. He was just here at the laboratory. He came in through the private garage just a few moments ago," Maria sobbed hysterically. "He locked me in the laundry room. He had a bag packed. He grabbed Zion right out of his crib. He looked crazy, Ms. Zuri. His clothes were torn and he was sweating." "Where did he go?" I demanded, sprinting toward the armored Range Rover, my voice tearing through my throat. "Did he say where he was taking my son?" "He looked right at the nursery camera before he disconnected the feed," Maria whispered, her voice trembling with absolute terror. "He said to tell you that he lost everything, so now you are going to lose everything too. He said they are going on a very long trip, and you are never going to see your son again." The line went completely dead. The line went completely dead. I did not scream. I did not drop the phone. I did not allow the paralyzing, suffocating terror of a mother losing her child to penetrate my mind. Panic is an emotion reserved for the unprepared, and I was never unprepared. I lowered the encrypted cell phone and turned to my security commander. My blood had turned to absolute liquid nitrogen. I was no longer simply a corporate executive defending an empire. I was a mother going to war. I jumped into the back of the armored Range Rover as the security team scrambled into their tactical vehicles. The driver slammed his foot on the gas, tearing out of the laboratory parking lot and plunging us into the dark, winding roads of the industrial park. Deshawn was a cornered, desperate predator. I knew days ago that when his corporate extortion failed and his fraudulent financial empire collapsed, he would inevitably reach for his ultimate trump card. To a narcissist, a child is not a human being. A child is leverage. A child is a human shield. Anticipating this exact cowardly maneuver, I had taken extreme tactical precautions. 3 weeks ago, I hired a former military intelligence operative to surgically implant a microscopic, military-grade GPS transmitter deep inside the plush stuffing of Zion's favorite brown teddy bear. Zion never slept without that bear. He never traveled without it. It was his absolute favorite possession, and right now it was the only thing connecting me to my stolen son. I pulled up the custom tracking application on my phone. The screen illuminated the dark cabin of the SUV. A bright red digital beacon blinked steadily against the dark map of Greater Atlanta. Deshawn was moving exceptionally fast. He was not heading toward Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport. He was not stupid enough to try a commercial terminal. He knew federal authorities would instantly flag his passport at any standard checkpoint. The red dot was flying south down a dark rural highway toward a small, unregulated private airstrip known for facilitating discreet cash-only charter flights. He was going to flee the country. I immediately dialed Evelyn Davis. My brilliant, ruthless attorney answered on the first ring despite the late hour. "Evelyn." I barked, my eyes completely locked on the moving red dot. "Deshawn breached my estate. He assaulted my night nanny and took Zion. He is currently heading south on Highway 85 toward the regional private airfield. He is attempting to flee the jurisdiction." I heard the sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line, followed by the rapid, furious clicking of a computer keyboard. Evelyn did not offer meaningless comfort. She went straight into legal warfare. "I am triggering the federal alert right now, Zuri," Evelyn stated, her voice radiating absolute lethal competence. "The embezzlement charges I filed against him this afternoon already flagged him as a high-level flight risk. by forcibly removing Zion from your custody without authorization and attempting to cross international borders, he has just escalated his crimes to federal kidnapping. I have the direct line to the FBI task force commander handling his financial fraud case. I am sending them your live GPS tracking coordinates right this second. Keep your team on him, Zuri. The federal cavalry is coming. Make sure they heavily arm the perimeter. Evelyn, I commanded, staring out the tinted window as our armored convoy merged onto the highway, pushing well past 100 miles per hour. He is completely unhinged. He has a chartered flight waiting. He is aiming for the Bahamas, where the banking is blind and the extradition laws are complicated. I am not letting that plane leave the ground. It will not, Evelyn promised fiercely. I will see you on the other side of this nightmare. I dropped the phone onto the leather seat. The engine of the Range Rover roared a deep guttural growl as my driver expertly wove through the sparse late-night traffic. The red beacon on my tracking app was slowing down. Deshaun had reached the airfield. The digital map showed his location moving past the main terminal building and driving directly onto the private tarmac. "He is on the runway," I shouted to the security commander sitting in the passenger seat. "Do not bother with the main gate. Breach the perimeter fencing. We take the vehicle straight to the aircraft." The commander nodded, pulling a heavy tactical radio to his mouth and barking sharp, rapid orders to the trailing security vehicles. We exited the highway, taking a sharp, violent turn onto the poorly lit access road leading to the airfield. Through the dense line of pine trees, I could see the flat expanse of the dark tarmac. The tall chain-link perimeter fence loomed ahead, secured with a heavy iron padlock. "Brace for impact," the driver warned, gripping the steering wheel. The heavy reinforced steel grille of the armored Range Rover slammed violently into the chain-link fence. The metal groaned and snapped, snapping the heavy iron padlock like a fragile twig. We burst through the barrier, tearing a massive hole in the perimeter and launching the heavy vehicle directly onto the smooth black asphalt of the runway. The acrid smell of aviation fuel instantly filled the cabin. A few hundred yards away, illuminated by the harsh white glow of the runway floodlights, sat a sleek white Gulfstream private jet. The auxiliary power unit was already running loudly, the turbine engines whining with a deafening high-pitched roar as the pilot prepared for an immediate illegal departure. Parked carelessly near the boarding stairs was Deshaun's dark sedan, the driver's side door hanging wide open. Deshaun was standing halfway up the metal aircraft stairs. In his left hand, he gripped a heavy leather duffel bag undoubtedly stuffed with whatever remaining stolen cash he had managed to hide. In his right arm, he held my son. Zion was clutching his brown teddy bear tightly against his chest, his small face stained with tears, crying out in confusion over the deafening roar of the jet engines. "Hit the plane," I ordered, my voice cold and absolute. "Block the nose gear." The driver slammed his foot on the accelerator. The heavy armored SUV roared across the tarmac, rubber burning against the asphalt as we hurtled directly toward the aircraft. The pilot sitting in the cockpit saw us coming and threw his hands up in sheer panic, instantly cutting the engine sequence. Our vehicle skidded violently to a halt, sliding sideways and coming to a dead stop mere inches from the jet's front landing gear, effectively barricading the plane from moving a single inch forward. Before the Range Rover had even fully settled, I kicked my door open and stepped out onto the floodlit tarmac. The wind whipped my hair across my face, but my eyes were locked completely onto the man standing on the stairs. Deshaun froze. He looked down at me, stepping out of the armored vehicle, his face contorting into an expression of absolute disbelief and sheer, unadulterated panic. His escape route was destroyed. His leverage was useless. The brilliant, arrogant wealth manager was nothing but a trapped rat on a brightly lit runway. "Put my son down, Deshaun," I yelled, my voice cutting sharply through the dying whine of the jet engines. He gripped Zion tighter, taking a desperate, frantic step backward up the stairs toward the open cabin door. "You cannot stop me, Zuri. You ruined my life. I have the paperwork. I have the authority. The pilot has been paid in full." Before he could take another step backward, the entire perimeter of the dark airfield erupted in a blinding explosion of flashing red and blue strobe lights. A dozen heavy black Federal Suburbans tore through the hole my vehicle had created in the fence, followed closely by local police cruisers, their sirens wailing a deafening, aggressive chorus. The federal vehicles swarmed the tarmac, moving with terrifying military precision. They surrounded the Gulfstream jet, cutting off every conceivable angle of escape and bathing the white aircraft in a harsh, chaotic glow of emergency lights. The doors of the Suburbans flew open simultaneously. Heavily armored FBI agents wearing dark tactical vests emblazoned with bright yellow letters poured onto the asphalt. They raised their tactical rifles, aiming the laser sights directly at the man standing paralyzed on the boarding stairs. "Federal agents," the lead commander roared through a heavy motorized megaphone, the sound echoing violently across the open airfield. "Deshaun Henderson, you are surrounded. Drop the bag. Put the child down on the stairs and put your hands behind your head. Do it exactly right now." Deshaun looked at the army of federal agents pointing lethal weapons at his chest. He looked at the flashing lights at the blocked jet, and finally at me standing calmly by my vehicle. The fabricated illusion of his superior intelligence shattered completely. His arrogance dissolved into pure pathetic cowardice. His knees buckled. He dropped the heavy leather duffel bag, letting it tumble down the metal stairs. He slowly lowered Zion, setting his crying son gently onto the platform, before raising his trembling hands high into the air above his head. "Move, move, move!" the tactical commander shouted. 3 heavily armed agents sprinted up the metal stairs. They did not handle him with professional courtesy. They grabbed Deshaun roughly by the shoulders, ripping his arms down and twisting them violently behind his back. The sharp, heavy snap of federal steel handcuffs echoed loudly over the tarmac. They hauled him forcefully down the stairs, dragging him toward the waiting armored transport vehicle. I did not wait for an invitation. I ran past the federal agents, sprinting up the stairs and dropping to my knees on the cold metal grating. I snatched Zion into my arms, pulling him tightly against my chest. The physical relief of holding my son, of burying my face in his soft hair, and smelling his familiar baby shampoo completely overwhelmed me. Zion wrapped his small arms around my neck, burying his tear-stained face into my shoulder while maintaining a desperate iron grip on his tracking teddy bear. "I have you, baby," I whispered, rocking him gently. "Mommy has you. You are completely safe." At the bottom of the stairs, Deshaun was actively thrashing against the grip of the federal agents. He was completely humiliated, stripped of his bespoke suits, his luxury cars, and his stolen millions. He was screaming wildly, his voice cracking with desperate manic delusion. "You cannot arrest me!" Deshaun howled, struggling violently as they pressed him against the hood of the black Suburban. "I am his father. I have the legal authority. She is crazy. She is mentally unstable. I have the power of attorney. Look at the documents in my bag. She needs to be committed to an institution. I am protecting my son from a lunatic." The lead FBI agent, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a face carved from stone, stepped forward. He did not look at the duffel bag. He reached into his tactical vest and pulled out a thick, legally binding document bearing the heavy official seal of the United States Federal Court. He held the document directly in front of Deshaun's sweating, panicked face. "We do not care about your fabricated medical documents, Mr. Henderson." The lead agent stated, his voice a cold, lethal monotone that silenced Deshaun's pathetic screaming instantly. "This is a federal arrest warrant for massive corporate embezzlement, wire fraud, and the interstate kidnapping of a minor. You are officially the property of the United States government." The agent shoved the warrant back into his vest and signaled to his team. "We will discuss your documents in federal lockup. Put him in the back." The agents shoved Deshaun forcefully into the back of the transport vehicle, slamming the heavy armored door shut. The loud metallic thud echoed across the tarmac, sealing his fate completely. I stood at the top of the stairs, holding my son tightly in my arms, watching the flashing red and blue lights carry the ruins of my former husband away into the dark Atlanta night. The empire was secure, the bloodline was protected, and the queen remained absolutely untouchable. 3 months evaporated into an endless, grueling marathon of brutal legal briefings, sworn depositions, and exhaustive federal testimonies. The cold, heavy concrete walls of the United States District Court in downtown Atlanta felt like a perfectly fitting arena for the final slaughter. I sat at the plaintiff's table, perfectly composed, wearing a sharply tailored charcoal suit that projected absolute, untouchable authority. Evelyn Davis sat right beside me, organizing our massive files with lethal practiced precision. Across the wide carpeted aisle sat the pathetic smoking ruins of the Henderson dynasty. Deshaun looked entirely diminished. He had been forcefully stripped of his bespoke Italian suits and his flashy designer watches. Instead, he was wearing a drab, oversized prison-issue jumpsuit that hung loosely off his thinning, deteriorating frame. 3 months sitting in a federal holding block without bail had completely drained the arrogant golden child glow from his skin, leaving him looking ashen and hollow. Beside him sat his heavily compensated defense attorney, a sleazy, loud-mouthed corporate shark named Marcus Vance, who was infamous for pulling dirty legal tricks to save guilty, desperate men. In the viewing gallery directly behind the defense table sat Gwendolyn and Terrence. The visual contrast from their former elite glory was absolutely staggering. Terrence looked completely hollowed out and dead behind the eyes. His foreclosure had been swift and brutally uncompromising, leaving him entirely bankrupt and publicly disgraced in front of his peers. Gwendolyn, however, was still fiercely clinging to her aristocratic delusions. She wore an outdated, badly tailored dress, her face pinched into a permanent scowl of toxic superiority. She glared at the back of my head, radiating pure, unadulterated hatred, completely oblivious to how pathetic she truly looked. The trial thus far had been a systematic, tactical dismantling of Deshaun's entire life. Federal prosecutors had already laid out the undeniable, sprawling reality of his massive embezzlement scheme. Now it was time for the defense to present their primary counter-argument. Marcus Vance stood up, buttoning his expensive suit jacket and projecting an air of manufactured theatrical confidence. He paced slowly in front of the judge, preparing to deliver his ultimate saving grace. Vance began spinning a wild, fantastical narrative. He claimed with a straight face that Deshaun was merely attempting to protect his family from a deeply mentally unstable wife. He told the silent court that I had suffered a catastrophic psychological breakdown following my pregnancy. He forcefully argued that my subsequent actions selling my highly lucrative company, freezing our joint accounts, and foreclosing on Terrence's mansion were the reckless, illegal maneuvers of a woman who was entirely legally incapacitated. "Your Honor," Vance announced, his voice booming dramatically across the tense courtroom, "my client is not a mastermind criminal. He is a devoted, terrified husband who was desperately trying to save his family's assets from a wife suffering a severe psychotic episode. We have physical, undeniable proof that Zuri Henderson recognized her own declining mental state and willingly, legally surrendered her autonomy to her husband." Deshaun sat up slightly straighter in his wooden chair, a faint, pathetic glimmer of hope returning to his sunken, dark eyes. He actually believed this absurd strategy was going to work. Vance reached into his heavy leather briefcase with a sweeping, theatrical flourish. He pulled out a crisp manila folder and extracted a single sheet of heavy bond paper, holding it aloft for the gallery to see. "I present to the court the official medical power of attorney. This document was willingly signed by Zuri Henderson, explicitly granting my client Deshaun Henderson total, absolute legal and financial proxy over her estate, her medical decisions, and her corporate holdings. Every single action she took against my client over the past 3 months is completely null and void due to her legally documented incapacitation." Vance marched confidently toward the high wooden bench and handed the document to the bailiff, who promptly passed it up to the presiding judge. The judge, a stern, silver-haired man with zero tolerance for courtroom theatrics, slowly adjusted his reading glasses. He looked down at the paper. He frowned deeply, his bushy eyebrows knitting together. He turned the paper over, examining the blank back. He placed it flat on his wooden desk and looked directly down at the defense attorney with an expression of sheer, unadulterated confusion. "Counselor," the judge said, his voice flat and entirely unimpressed, "what exactly am I looking at here?" "The signed medical power of attorney, Your Honor," Vance replied, looking slightly confused by the judge's cold reaction. "Granting my client full legal proxy." The judge picked up the paper and held it in the air for the entire courtroom to clearly see. "Counselor, this paper is completely blank." A heavy, stunned silence dropped over the courtroom like a suffocating lead weight. Marcus Vance's mouth fell wide open. He scrambled forward, snatching the paper directly from the bailiff's hand. He stared wildly at the blank white sheet, flipping it over and over again, as if the black ink was somehow hiding within the fibers. Deshaun violently lunged forward, gripping the heavy edge of the defense table, his knuckles turning stark white. The remaining color rapidly drained from his face, leaving him looking physically sick. He stared at the empty paper, his eyes wide with absolute sheer terror. I sat perfectly still, allowing a slow, sharp smile to touch the corners of my lips. Deshaun had severely underestimated my intelligence and my foresight. Months ago, when he handed me that document in my kitchen, trying to aggressively force me to sign away my freedom and my child, I had used my own pen. It was a highly specialized drafting pen I had ordered from a tactical security supply company. The chemical ink was specifically formulated to completely evaporate and vanish into thin air within exactly 4 hours of hitting the paper. There was no signature. There was no proxy. There was only a blank, useless piece of paper and a defense attorney who had just humiliated himself in federal court. "There was a signature!" Deshaun shouted, losing all composure and pointing a shaking, frantic finger directly at me. "She signed it. I saw her sign it. She is playing games with you." "Control your client, counselor," the judge snapped, banging his gavel sharply against the sounding block. "Or I will have him forcibly removed from my courtroom." Vance frantically shoved the blank paper back into his briefcase, looking entirely defeated and incredibly foolish. The heavy anchor of their entire defense had just evaporated into nothingness. Evelyn Davis stood up, smoothing her blazer with elegant, lethal grace. It was our turn. The defensive games were officially over. Now we were going for the absolute kill. "Your Honor," Evelyn began, her voice commanding absolute undivided attention. "The defense has attempted to paint my client as mentally unstable to justify Mr. Henderson's horrific federal crimes. We would now like to enter our own physical evidence into the record, evidence that proves Mr. Henderson actively, deliberately, and maliciously attempted to poison his own wife." The courtroom erupted into shocked, overlapping murmurs. Even the stern judge leaned forward, his expression turning dark and incredibly serious. Evelyn did not hesitate. She signaled our technical assistant sitting at the projector. "Prosecution Exhibit F, Your Honor. Audio recovered from a hidden recording baby monitor placed in the primary master bedroom of the Henderson estate." The digital audio file began to play over the courtroom speakers. The sound quality was crisp, sharp, and entirely undeniable. Deshaun's voice, arrogant and cruel, echoed through the large room. Everyone listened in absolute horrified silence as the recording captured Deshaun blatantly admitting to crushing heavy sedatives into my daily prenatal vitamins. The audio clearly caught him detailing his calculated plan to manufacture a fake psychological breakdown so he could legally steal my company and fund his escape with his mistress. Deshaun shrank down into his chair, burying his face in his shaking hands. There was nowhere left to hide. The entire room was listening to the monster he truly was. "Prosecution Exhibit G, Your Honor." Evelyn continued, her voice ringing with righteous, undeniable fury. She handed a thick, sealed folder to the bailiff. "These are the certified independent laboratory toxicology results from the very vitamins Mr. Henderson tampered with. The lab confirms the capsules were heavily laced with powerful unprescribed psychiatric sedatives and severe psychological disruptors. He was systematically poisoning the mother of his child to facilitate a corporate theft." A loud collective gasp rolled through the crowded gallery. "And finally, Your Honor," Evelyn concluded, lifting a massive, heavy, leather-bound binder and slamming it onto the center of our table. The heavy thud echoed like a gunshot in the quiet room. "Prosecution Exhibit H, the complete unredacted embezzlement ledger recovered directly from Mr. Henderson's encrypted servers. This ledger undeniably tracks every single dollar he stole from vulnerable elderly clients, routing the funds directly into the fraudulent accounts used to fund his mistress, his luxury lifestyle, and his sister's suburban mansion." At the loud, explicit mention of the mansion, Gwendolyn Henderson finally realized the game was entirely over. The money was gone. The legacy was completely destroyed. Her favorite golden son was going to federal prison for a very long time. True to her toxic, manipulative nature, she instantly reverted to her favorite ultimate survival tactic. She decided to make herself the victim. Gwendolyn let out a loud, dramatic, wailing gasp that echoed shrilly off the vaulted ceiling. She clutched both of her hands dramatically over her chest, swaying wildly in the wooden gallery pew. "My heart!" Gwendolyn screamed, thrashing against Terrence, who looked entirely exhausted by her pathetic performance. "My heart is failing. The stress of these vicious lies is killing me. Help me. Someone call an ambulance right now." She threw herself forcefully out of the pew, collapsing onto the carpeted aisle of the gallery and writhing theatrically on the floor. She squeezed her eyes tightly shut and let out loud, rhythmic groans, waiting for the room to rush to her aid. Nobody moved. The federal marshals standing at the heavy oak doors merely glanced at her and rolled their eyes. Evelyn Davis did not even turn around to look. I sat perfectly still watching the pathetic display with cold, absolute indifference. The judge stared down from his elevated bench, looking at Gwendolyn thrashing on the floor with an expression of profound, unadulterated disgust. He did not call for medical assistance. He did not express a single ounce of concern for the dramatic woman rolling on his carpet. "Bailiff!" The judge barked, his voice laced with heavy, lethal irritation. "Instruct the woman in the gallery to return to her seat immediately and maintain strict decorum. If she continues this highly theatrical display of disruption, you will escort her out of my courtroom and she will be held in immediate contempt." Realizing that her performance was completely failing to garner a single ounce of sympathy, Gwendolyn miraculously and instantly recovered. The supposed fatal heart attack vanished completely. She scrambled quickly off the floor, her face burning with dark, red-hot humiliation. She brushed off her outdated dress and slid silently back into the wooden pew, refusing to look at anyone. The ultimate narcissistic manipulator had finally permanently lost her audience. The judge turned his attention back to the defense table. His eyes were hard-cold and entirely unforgiving. He looked at Deshawn not as a man or a former elite wealth manager, but as a highly dangerous predatory threat to society that needed to be permanently neutralized. The undeniable heavy weight of the audio recordings, the toxic lab results, and the massive financial ledgers had completely sealed the coffin. There was no shadow of a doubt left in the room. The absolute silence in the courtroom was deafening. Deshawn slowly lowered his hands from his face, looking up at the high bench with hollow, dead eyes. He was completely broken, his spirit crushed under the weight of his own hubris. The judge picked up his heavy wooden gavel, holding it suspended in the tense air for a long, agonizing second. He looked directly into Deshawn's eyes, projecting absolute, unquestionable legal authority. "Deshawn Henderson," the judge stated, his voice booming with severe, lethal finality, "the evidence presented in this court today is absolutely irrefutable. You have engaged in a highly calculated predatory scheme targeting the most vulnerable members of our society for your own greedy financial gain. But far worse than your financial crimes is the sheer calculated malice you directed at your own family. You actively, knowingly, and continuously poisoned your wife. You attempted to manufacture a severe psychiatric crisis to steal her hard-earned assets, and you violently kidnapped your own infant son in a cowardly attempt to flee international borders. Deshawn, your actions are the most reprehensible abuse of marital trust I have ever seen." The judge slammed the gavel down onto the sounding block. The loud, sharp crack echoed violently through the room, signaling the absolute end. "I am ready to hand down my sentencing." The judge did not hesitate. His voice was a hammer striking the final anvil of justice. Deshawn Henderson was sentenced to 15 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary. There would be no early release, no plea bargains, and absolutely no mercy. He was convicted of multiple counts of wire fraud, corporate embezzlement, and the attempted poisoning of his spouse. The courtroom watched in deafening silence as two federal marshals stepped forward, pulling Deshawn out of his chair and securing his wrists tightly behind his back. He did not look back at me as they marched him through the heavy wooden doors. He was a ghost long before he ever reached his cell. Terrence, sitting beside the empty chair, was visibly vibrating with terror. The judge handed him a brutal 5-year sentence in a federal facility for his active, willing complicity in his son's financial crimes. Terrence collapsed forward, resting his head on the defense table and sobbing aloud. His legacy was entirely incinerated. Then the judge turned his cold gaze toward the gallery. Gwendolyn was granted a heavily supervised probation due to her lack of direct physical involvement in the poisoning scheme. However, her true sentence was delivered outside the confines of the legal system. It was a social execution. The scandal ripped through Atlanta high society like a wildfire. Her prominent megachurch officially and publicly excommunicated her, removing her name from every plaque and donor wall. Her elite historic sorority revoked her lifetime membership, demanding she return her pins and letters. The exclusive country club permanently barred her from stepping foot on their manicured grounds. Her wealthy friends abandoned her, instantly treating her like a highly contagious disease. Gwendolyn was forcefully relocated to a tiny, cramped rental apartment on the undesirable side of town, entirely isolated and drowning in absolute social irrelevance. Summer arrived in Atlanta, bringing a thick, oppressive heat that settled heavily over the concrete city. I was sitting in the back of my custom black Maybach, enjoying the chilled, perfectly conditioned air of the leather cabin. My driver was navigating through a dilapidated low-end strip mall on the outskirts of the metropolitan area, taking a brief shortcut to avoid a traffic collision on the interstate. As we rolled slowly over the cracked, uneven asphalt, a flash of harsh fluorescent light caught my eye. I looked out through the dark-tinted privacy glass and saw a discount beauty supply store. Standing behind the scratched laminate counter was Dominique. The transformation was breathtaking in its absolute brutality. The designer handbags, the expensive blowouts, and the arrogant sneer were entirely gone. She wore a cheap, stiff polyester smock, her hair pulled back into a messy, careless bun. She looked exhausted, ringing up bundles of synthetic braiding hair and cheap plastic combs for a line of irritated customers. As the massive black Maybach glided past the storefront, she looked up from the cash register. Our eyes locked through the plate glass window. I saw the immediate flash of recognition hit her face, followed instantly by a wave of crushing, unadulterated shame. She knew exactly who was sitting behind that tinted glass. I did not lower the window. I did not offer a cruel smile or a victorious glare. I simply raised my plastic cup, took a slow, deliberate sip of my iced caramel coffee, and looked away. My driver accelerated, carrying me back to the elite world she had desperately, unsuccessfully tried to steal. I left Atlanta that same afternoon, heading straight down to the coast. The Savannah sun was beginning its slow descent, casting a brilliant, fiery golden glow over the massive expanse of my ancestral land. The heavy earth-moving equipment was parked neatly in rows across the site, their massive diesel engines resting silently for the evening. I stepped out of my vehicle and stood on the freshly turned dirt, breathing in the rich, humid smell of the Georgia soil. I was not building a sterile, soulless corporate shopping mall. I was not paving over my family's sacred history to erect luxury condominiums for wealthy strangers. I was pouring my absolute soul into something profoundly real. The architectural blueprints resting on the hood of my car detailed a sprawling state-of-the-art community wellness and technology center specifically designed for Black youth in the region. The campus would feature advanced STEM laboratories, mental health counseling facilities, expansive community gardens, and full athletic complexes. It was fully funded, completely debt-free, and legally protected within an ironclad generational trust that no man could ever touch. It would bear my grandfather's name, standing as a permanent, unshakable monument to his endurance and my ultimate victory. Zion would grow up running freely on this rich soil, knowing exactly who he was and understanding the fierce, undeniable strength of the mother who had fought the entire world to protect him. I looked out over the vast open horizon, feeling the warm, salty coastal wind brush against my face. The war was over and the air had never felt so incredibly clean. They thought because I did not come from their world I was weak. They mistook my silence for submission. They called me out of my name, tried to steal my legacy, and thought they could bury me. But they forgot one thing. I am the one who owns the dirt. And when you back a queen into a corner, she does not just fight back, she flips the entire board.